LoveLore Library. Chapter 13. Your Majesty, please tell me. Shen Yu was unwilling to give up. Guijun, mind your own business. Shang Junlin's tone was somewhat unhappy. You shouldn't meddle in things that you shouldn't. I know. Shen Yu ended the topic with Lu Russian. The atmosphere suddenly quieted down. Shang Junlin didn't know why Shen Yu didn't continue. He also didn't know why this was what he wanted, but it made him feel worse. Even in winter, the scenery of the imperial palace didn't appear bleak. Instead, it had a different flavor. The cold-resistant flowers and plants offered by the southern kingdom grew freely. Not far away, there were beautiful red plum blossoms. Under the decoration of various colors, the winter became different. The two walked forward in silence. Shen Yu's eyes were full of the scenery around him. Because of his health, he could only stay indoors most of the winter. If he was exposed to the wind, he would have to lie down for 10 days to half a month. If Imperial Physician Gu hadn't nursed his body this winter, he definitely wouldn't have been able to walk outside without any worries like now. It snowed lightly last night. The places where no one walked were covered with a light layer of white. Shen Yu looked around as he walked. He didn't notice that the man beside him had been looking at him. I don't say it because I'm the emperor. I don't need to explain to others what I do. An indifferent voice came. Shen Yu paused. He suddenly realized that His Majesty seemed to be answering his question. Shen Yu stopped and looked sideways at Shang Junlin. But if Your Majesty doesn't say it, they will make wild guesses and misinterpret Your Majesty's true intentions. Guijun seems to be very concerned about my reputation. Shang Junlin's tone seemed to be stating a fact. I'm now one with Your Majesty. Your Majesty is my husband. Isn't it normal for me to be concerned about my husband's reputation? Is that what you think? Shang Junlin looked at Shen Yu ambiguously. Shen Yu was afraid of the cold. Whenever he went out, he had to wear thick clothes. The thin young man didn't look bloated even if he wore thick clothes. It couldn't hide his transparent temperament. The young man's eyes were clear and his expression was calm. It seemed that what he said was sincere. Your Majesty, what else do you think I would think? Shen Yu tilted his head. Actually, Your Majesty, you can take it that I don't like their behavior and don't want them to die peacefully. Shen Yu's eyes darkened. In his previous life, the King of Yu and others had seized the throne by accumulating many little drops into an ocean. To be honest, he didn't care who the throne would eventually fall on. However, as long as he was alive, the King of Yu wouldn't be able to get what he wanted like in his previous life. After staying outside for a long time, Shen Yu's face was red from the cold. Shang Junlin reached out and touched it gently. I feel your kindness. Shen Yu. No, how did she feel my feelings? Your Majesty, you don't have to be embarrassed. I already know your feelings for me. Shang Junlin suddenly realized that it was the secret information from the hidden dragon guards. He changed the topic. I will listen to you on this matter. Until he returned to Yuzhang Palace, Shen Yu still didn't understand why Shang Junlin's attitude was so strange. Because of this matter, Shen Yu forgot to ask Shang Junlin about the return of the vassal kings. Forget it, I will ask next time. Shen Yu murmured. Your Majesty, this is the revised schedule of the banquet. Please take a look. Shen Yu took it and looked through it carefully. He said, tell them to follow the arrangement. Yes. After the servant left, Shen Yu stood by the window and looked into the distance. Yuzhang Palace was not far from the emperor's bedroom. He didn't know what the original designer of Yuzhang Palace was thinking. From where Shen Yu was standing now, he could see the corner of the emperor's bedroom. He couldn't see the specific figure, but it was enough to remind him of the person. After standing for a while, Shinyu felt a little cold. He walked back to the table and sat down. In his previous life, Shin Qingran was not conferred the title of emperor when he entered the palace. He also didn't participate in the banquet. Shinyu didn't participate in the banquet, so he didn't know what happened at the banquet. The process of the banquet was complicated. Fortunately, Shinyu had similar experience in his previous life. He also had the help of people who were familiar with the process. It was quite easy for him to handle it. With the arrival of the emperor's birthday, the news that Feng Jun announced became more and more shocking. This time, with the emperor's permission, the news was not deliberately hidden. The people and the officials almost received the news at the same time. Just like when the officials first received the news, everyone's first reaction was disbelief. Censor Zhang was used to maintaining his reputation. The people in the capital had a good impression of him. Suddenly, they found out that he had done so many things behind the scenes. They were unwilling to believe it. However, the evidence given by the imperial court was too sufficient. The shocking facts were in front of them. They had no choice but to believe it. So, Censor Zhang was arrested not because he angered that person, but because his crimes were unforgivable. But, if that's the case, why didn't they announce his crimes from the beginning? That person must have a reason for doing so. Think about it, after Censor Zhang was imprisoned, didn't they catch a few more of his accomplices? Yes, it's all thanks to His Majesty's wisdom and martial prowess. He had anticipated that someone would break into the prison and set up an inescapable net to catch those people. Everyone talked at once. A few people who were leading the conversation looked at each other and quietly left the crowd. These people were ordered to do things by Shinyu. Shinyu was in the imperial palace, but there were not many restrictions. He had a dark network. Although it was not as large as in his previous life, it was not difficult to do some small things in the capital. Young master, the matter you ordered has been completed. Mu Shi whispered as she poured Shinyu a cup of tea. What's the situation outside? Shinyu picked up the teacup and took a sip. Everything is the same as before, except. Mu Shi's face revealed a strange expression. Second young master broke his leg. For some reason, he angered the Marquis. In a fit of anger, the Marquis put him under house arrest. Shinyu suddenly thought of the day when Shang Junlin asked him if he wanted to help him vent his anger. He felt that Shin Qingran's matter must have something to do with him. However, would the monarch of a country really help him vent his anger over such a small matter? Shinyu's mood was indescribably complicated. He put down the teacup and asked, "Do you know how Shin Qingran broke his leg?" Mu Shi shook her head. Our people didn't find the reason. I will ask them to investigate carefully. No need. Shinyu rubbed the sides of the cup. If this matter was really done by Shang Junlin, they might not be able to find anything even if they investigated further. Well, as an elder brother, when I heard that my younger brother broke his leg, should I send someone to ask about it? If young master sends someone, the Marquis and second young master will definitely be happy. Mu Shi's eyes flashed with a trace of craftiness. After leaving the manor for so long, the Marquis of Jinbei would definitely welcome Shinyu if he sent someone to the Marquis's manor. As for second young master, he had to pretend to be happy even if he was not happy. Previously, when they were in the Marquis's manor, second young master often bullied her young master because Madame Ru was favored. He even snatched their normal things. Mu Shi had long remembered this. Well, you can arrange it as you see fit. He couldn't let Marquis Jinbei forget that he still had a legitimate son who was sent to the palace by him. Shinyu didn't want to see the scene of Marquis Jinbei and Madame Ru as close as a family after he left. Yes. Mu Shi thought of countless ways to embarrass the Marquis's manor, but she rejected them one by one. She had to think of a way to make the Marquis's manor feel uncomfortable, but others couldn't criticize her. Why didn't Imperial Physician Gu come today? Shin Yu suddenly remembered that Imperial Physician Gu seemed to have not come for a few days. Imperial Physician Gu asked for leave a few days ago. He said that the child at home caused some trouble and had to deal with it. Mu Shi brought the warm medicine. Before Imperial Physician Gu left, he prepared the herbs that young master needed and also left a token. If young master needs it, you can go to him at any time. Why? Shin Yu remembered that some time ago, Mu Shi was frightened by Shang Junlin, so he deliberately gave her a leave. Imperial Physician Gu didn't come to Yuzhang Palace after that. It must have happened during that time. Mu Shi's words also confirmed his guess. It's my fault. I wanted to find time to tell young master, but these days, for some reason, His Majesty came to Yuzhang Palace whenever he was free. Mu Shi was afraid that it would be like last time, so she didn't find a chance to tell Shin Yu. It's okay. Did Imperial Physician Gu say where to find him? A pharmacy on West Street in the capital. Shin Yu's understanding of Imperial Physician Gu came from that person in his previous life. He didn't even know the specific time when Imperial Physician Gu was punished. He asked Mu Shi because he was worried that Imperial Physician Gu suffered the same thing as in his previous life when he didn't know. Little did he know that Imperial Physician Gu was also afraid at this time. In a secluded courtyard, a young man in black was practicing swordsmanship. The young man in light blue clothes looked at the young man in the courtyard with a gentle gaze and felt very lucky. When the young man noticed Imperial Physician Gu, he put away his sword and ran over. Imperial Physician Gu touched the young man's sweaty hair and said, "I have to go back to work tomorrow. You stay at home and don't cause trouble. Are you going to take care of that Gui Jun again?" The young man curled his lips. "Don't be rude. Gui Jun is my benefactor. You should respect him." Knowing that this child was stubborn, Imperial Physician Gu told him what had happened these days. "I didn't know you encountered such a dangerous situation." The young man was scared after listening. He hugged the young man's waist and said in a muffled voice, "Shin Gui Jun is my benefactor from now on." In a place where Imperial Physician Gu couldn't see, Gu Huai's eyes were dark. At noon, the imperial chef in the palace made new snacks. The white pastries were decorated with bright plum blossoms. The fragrance was sweet but not greasy. Shin Yu couldn't help but eat a little more. He was a little full, so he walked outside to digest. When Shang Junlin came, he saw Shin Yu's lazy appearance. He walked over and hugged Shin Yu. Shin Yu leaned on him and helped him walk. Shang Junlin said, "If you're tired, go in and rest." Shin Yu shook his head, "I'm digesting. I'm a little full." Zhen was wondering what happened to you. Shang Junlin's eyes had a hint of a smile. "Why are you still full?" "It's because the new imperial chef sent by Your Majesty made delicious snacks." Shin Yu pretended to complain. "Then Zhen should transfer him away." Shang Junlin lowered his head and approached. "No, it's mine now." Shin Yu hurriedly turned his head and his voice suddenly disappeared. His lips just happened to touch Shang Junlin's sharp jawline. Genius 1 second. Remember this website, www.biku50. CC Literature Mobile Version Website, biku50. CC. Chapter 14. Strange emotions spread in the air. Shin Yu forgot to move for a moment and maintained the posture of half leaning on Shang Junlin. Shang Junlin didn't know what to think, but he didn't push him away at first. In the end, Shin Yu came back to his senses first and hurriedly retreated. "Be careful." The road was slippery on a snowy day. Shin Yu retreated too quickly and almost slipped. Shang Junlin was quick to help him up. Shin Yu's emotions fluctuated too much. After calming down for a while, he saw the man's arm firmly supporting him. He lowered his eyes awkwardly. For a long time, the man still didn't show any signs of letting go of him. Shin carefully glanced at him and asked, "Your Majesty." "Yes." Shang Junlin's expression was calm and his eyes were clear. Obviously, he was in a normal state. Shin secretly laughed at himself for overthinking. It was just an accidental touch. How could Shang Junlin lose his composure because of it? "Go in." "Okay." Shin was sent back to his room by Shang Junlin. The two stayed for a while before Shang Junlin left. Shin didn't take the accident to heart, but he didn't know how many waves were set off in Shang Junlin's heart at this moment. Shang Junlin went all the way back to the imperial study. Except for eunuch Meng, he dismissed all the servants. He couldn't focus on the official business that he usually handled easily. His mind was full of the soft touch on his chin. It was cold and soft. Shang Junlin couldn't help but reach out and touch the place where Shin touched. A trace of confusion flashed through his eyes. "Why?" Eunuch Meng stood aside and looked down. He didn't dare to make a sound to disturb the emperor who was in deep thought. Shin woke up from his afternoon nap and was shocked to see the man sitting by the bed. "Why didn't your Majesty let someone call me?" Shin sat up with the quilt. "I saw that you were sleeping soundly, so I didn't call you." Shang Junlin also couldn't figure out why he suddenly came to Yuzhang Palace and sat beside Shin Yu's bed for the whole afternoon. The man's expression remained the same. Shin didn't think much about it. He got up and put on his clothes. "How long has His Majesty been here?" Shang Junlin lied without batting an eyelid. "I just got here not long ago." Mu Shi, who had been tidying up Shin Yu's outer robe for more than an hour, glanced at Shang Junlin in surprise when she heard what Shang Junlin said. When she met his gaze, she immediately looked away. Whatever His Majesty said, it would be as long as it took. Anyway, the one waiting was not her young master. She could not be bothered to care what the emperor thought. After tidying himself up, Shin Yu followed Shang Junlin to the outer room. Mu Shi poured hot tea for them and left the room. Shang Junlin looked at Shin Yu and didn't say anything. Shin Yu said rascally, "Your Majesty, why did you come here at this hour? Is there something important?" Shin Yu's work and rest schedule was very regular. He never made life difficult for himself. After entering the palace, he also followed his previous habits. Shang Junlin was the only master in the palace. Shang Junlin had no objection to this, so the others didn't dare to have any objections. Shin Yu said that living in the palace was much more comfortable than living in Jinbei Ho's residence. Shang Junlin knew his work and rest habits. Usually, he wouldn't come here during his rest time. Oh, right. Most of the time, when he was taking a nap, Shang Junlin was still busy with official business. "How come today? It's almost time for the palace banquet. If you have any questions, you can ask me. It's your first time dealing with this kind of thing. It's normal that you're not familiar with it. Is Your Majesty worried about me?" Shin Yu felt warm in his heart. "If not, Your Majesty asked at the right time. There are some things that I don't quite understand." Shin Yu said something that shouldn't be known to people who didn't live in the palace. "Your Majesty, please enlighten me." Shang Junlin was in a good mood and answered one by one. Shin Yu thanked him with a smile. Shang Junlin was caught off guard by his smile. "Your Majesty, this year shouldn't be the day when the vassal kings return to the capital. Why did Your Majesty call them back?" Shin Yu thought about this question for a few days, but he couldn't think of a reason. In his previous life, only the King of Yu returned to the capital. He found a reason to come back. "Your Majesty has entered the palace. Naturally, you have to meet with the royal family." Shin Yu was stunned. He thought of all the possible plans that Shang Junlin might have, but he didn't think that the reason would be like this. TSK, I don't have a good relationship with the royal family. Your Majesty, you don't have to care too much about them. Just recognize them. When it came to these people who were supposed to be relatives and elders, Shang Junlin didn't have any feelings or respect. Shin Yu knew that Shang Junlin and the royal family didn't have a good relationship. He heard it from the King of Yu in his previous life. Shang Junlin was the only legitimate son of the Empress. He should have been appointed as the crown prince. He should have grown up smoothly and inherited the throne. Unfortunately, the late emperor wasn't clear-headed. He wanted to abolish the legitimate son and make way for the son of his favorite concubine. But in the end, Shang Junlin killed all the sons of the late emperor and his favorite concubine. He took the throne in a bloody way. The royal family had always been dissatisfied with this. In his previous life, the King of Yu took advantage of this to win over other royal families. He gave Shang Junlin a lot of trouble. Unfortunately, Shang Junlin was too strong. Their various actions in the early stage were like scratching an itch through a shoe. Only in the later stage did they really cause trouble for Shang Junlin. Who were the royal families? Shin Yu searched for a few names in his memory. It was a good opportunity to meet them at the palace banquet. The imperial edict asking the vassal kings to return to the capital had been sent to the fief of each of the vassal kings. There weren't many vassal kings left. Most of them were from the late emperor's generation. As for those who were of the same generation as Shang Junlin, most of them had been killed by him. The rest of them had to live with their tails between their legs and didn't dare to show their faces. When they received the imperial edict from the capital, Shang Junlin's brother's first reaction was fear. Was the emperor finally going to make a move on them? They were relieved when they learned that the emperor was only going back to attend the palace banquet. They didn't dare to delay. After receiving the imperial edict, they immediately ordered their subordinates to pack their luggage at the fastest speed and set foot on the road back to the capital. The King of Yu was the only one who was caught off guard by the emperor's news. He wanted to find an excuse to come to the capital, but he couldn't do it while he was still in the capital. The people who delivered the imperial edict were already on their way to his fief. The King of Yu had no choice but to put down what he was doing and rush back to his fief. He couldn't let the emperor know that he had secretly left his fief. Several fast horses died on the way back. He didn't rest for days and nights. Finally, he rushed back before the emperor's men entered his fief. He didn't have time to rest. After he cleaned up the traces of his departure, the people who delivered the imperial edict arrived. After receiving the imperial edict, the eunuch who delivered the imperial edict saw that the King of Yu didn't look well. He asked with concern, "Your Highness, are you feeling unwell?" "Thank you for your concern. I'm fine." The people behind the King of Yu passed a pouch to the eunuch who delivered the imperial edict. The eunuch calmly weighed the pouch and his expression became more amiable. He smiled and said, "Your Highness, please take care of yourself. I won't disturb your rest." After the people from the capital left, the King of Yu's legs went soft and he almost fell. The people behind him quickly supported him and said, "Your Highness." The King of Yu only felt that his vision turned black and he lost consciousness in the anxious voice of his subordinates. The King of Yu's residence was suddenly in a mess. The news was immediately passed to the hidden dragon guards who were mixed in with the imperial edict. Then, it was sent to Shang Junlin in an urgent and encrypted manner. The King of Yu didn't have time to rest. The emperor's imperial edict was so urgent that he had to leave for the capital immediately. His confidant was worried that he wouldn't be able to make it in time. Before the King of Yu woke up, he moved him onto the carriage back to the capital. The King of Yu woke up in the shaky carriage. After hearing his confidant's words, he was so angry that his chest hurt. The confidant lowered his head and prepared to endure the King of Yu's anger. The King of Yu was a person who cared a lot about his reputation. Now that he was in such a sorry state, he was going to be very angry. The King of Yu waved his hand weakly and said, "I know." He really didn't have any temper. He had never suffered so much in his life. However, he couldn't tell anyone about it. There was still a mess in the capital waiting for him to clean up. Just thinking about it gave him a headache. Shen Qingran also had a bad time recently. Not only did he break his leg, but he was also grounded by Count Jinbei. He couldn't find the person he liked. 2 days ago, that person had sent him a message, but there had been no news from her for the past 2 days. What Shen Qingran couldn't stand the most was that people kept talking about how Shen Yu was favored after entering the palace and what the emperor had done for him. Every time he thought about how close he was to becoming Shen Qingran's wife, Shen Qingran would go crazy with jealousy. Second young master hid a few more servants yesterday. The servants in the manor are becoming more and more unwilling to serve him. Mu Shi put the plum blossoms she picked outside into a vase and said. Mu Shi always felt that second young master was very fake. Every day, he would tell the servants that everyone was equal. He didn't ask for less servants to serve him. However, those short-sighted servants believed his words and liked to stay by his side more and more. Oh. Shen Yu raised his eyebrows. Hasn't he always disliked people who casually hit and scold servants? He's just pretending. Mu Shi curled her lips and said disdainfully, "It's just words. This servant has inquired before. The treatment in his courtyard is far worse than that of the servants by young master's side. I don't know what kind of magic potion those servants have been fed to think that he is better than young master." Shang Junlin was reading memorials on the side. When he heard this, he raised his head. They are short-sighted and have eyes but fail to see. In my opinion, the bastard son of Count Jinbei's family is far inferior to your young master. Mu Shi nodded fiercely. Her fear of Shang Junlin had subsided. Recently, Shang Junlin liked to bring memorials to Yuzhang Palace to read. Mu Shi was no longer as startled by him as before. "Your Majesty, have you finished your work?" Shen Yu walked over with a hand warmer. Shang Junlin had occupied the place where he originally used to read. The place was very comfortable, and Shen Yu could stay there for the whole afternoon. Seeing Shen Yu come over, Shang Junlin made room for him and complained half-truthfully, "Your Majesty really doesn't care about me anymore." "Your Majesty, what are you talking about?" Shen Yu sat down unceremoniously and said sweet words. "Your Majesty will always be irreplaceable in my heart. Your Majesty, take a look at this." Shang Junlin handed him a memorials. Shen Yu took it and looked at it silently. Then he silently returned it and stared at Shang Junlin without saying a word. It was a memorials to persuade the emperor to take a concubine. "What does your Majesty think?" Shang Junlin's expression didn't change. "I have many of the same memorials here. Genius 1 second. Remember this website, www.biku50. CC Literature Mobile Version Reading Website, biku50. CC. Chapter 15. The palace servants kneeled down. No one expected that Shen Guijun, who had always been gentle and good-tempered, would suddenly say such words. They didn't dare to look up at the emperor's face, but they had heard about the emperor's temper. Shen Guijun's words would definitely anger the emperor. What they couldn't figure out was why Shen Yu wanted to dig his own grave. The emperor doted on him, but since ancient times, how could there only be one beauty in the emperor's harem? Shen Yu not only showed his jealousy, but also used threats. Wasn't he cutting off his own path of retreat? Mu Shi's forehead was covered with a layer of fine sweat. She restrained the fear in her heart and looked up. Unfortunately, from her angle, she could only see her son's face and not the emperor's expression. In the oppressive silence, eunuch Meng carefully looked at the emperor's face. Suddenly, his heart jumped. The emperor didn't look angry. When he looked at Shen Yu again, he still had a smile on his face. Only his pitch-black eyes gave off a bone-chilling coldness. Eunuch Meng couldn't understand the Duke of Zhenbei's son. The two protagonists, who were silently watched, didn't care about the palace servant's thoughts. Shen Yu looked at the handsome emperor in front of him and said, "Your Majesty, do you really want to accept a new person into the harem? How can my noble emperor be so jealous?" Shang Junlin leaned close to Shen Yu's ear and said in a low voice with a hint of hint, "If your noble emperor can use practical actions to dispel my thoughts, I will do as you say." The two didn't seem to be talking about the expansion of the emperor's harem, but something insignificant. Shen Yu lowered his eyes and glanced at the kneeling palace servants. His eyes lingered on a little eunuch for a while. When the eunuch realized something was wrong, he withdrew his eyes and said, "Your Majesty, do you really want to be here in front of these people?" Shang Junlin held Shen Yu's waist and put him on his lap. He casually glanced at eunuch Meng and said, "Meng Chang, take them out." Eunuch Meng didn't dare to disobey. He bowed his head and took all the palace servants away. After the palace servants left, Shen Yu loosened her grip on Shang Junlin's collar and wanted to get down from Shang Junlin's lap. Just as he moved, he felt the arm around his waist tighten. Shen Yu looked at Shang Junlin in confusion. His gaze seemed to say, "She's gone. Shouldn't you let go of me now?" Unexpectedly, not only did Shang Junlin not let go of her, he even pulled her into his arms and asked meaningfully, "Gui Jun, what do you think? Is your Majesty dissatisfied with my performance just now?" Shen Yu glared at him. Presumably, the whole capital will soon know that Shen Gui Jun, who just entered the palace, is not only jealous, but also threatened His Majesty not to accept new people into the palace. "Your Majesty, how do you plan to compensate me for the loss of my reputation?" Shang Junlin lifted Shen Yu's chin and looked at him deeply. "What kind of compensation do you want?" "I'm tired of looking at the treasures of Yuzhang Palace, Your Majesty. Your appetite is not small." Shang Junlin's words were not false. Yuzhang Palace was the most gorgeous palace except for a few main palaces. There were many rare treasures used for decoration. In terms of magnificence, it was even better than the emperor's bedroom. After Shen Yu became the master of the Jade Gate Palace, the emperor's rewards were even more endless. Which one of them wasn't a precious item? Shen Yu, on the other hand, lightly said that he was tired of looking at them, and Shang Junlin had to send him a new batch. "Your Majesty is too kind." Shen Yu took Shang Junlin's words as a compliment. His eyebrows curved, and his index finger tapped the man's shoulder. "When does Your Majesty plan to let me go?" Shang Junlin had one hand on Shen Yu's waist and the other hand pinched his chin. Hearing this, Shang Junlin let go of his hand, and Shen Yu slowly moved away from the man. This time, he did not encounter any obstacles. Shen Yu turned back. Shang Junlin had already started reading the memorials again. Other than suddenly stopping him, there was nothing strange. Shen Yu shook off the various thoughts in his mind and picked up the royal family genealogy that Shang Junlin had sent over. The royal family, especially Shang Junlin's generation, did not have a large population. Other than the King of Yu, the other members of the royal family were very well behaved. Even the King of Yu did not dare to show any ambition at this stage. Shang Junlin rested in Yuzhang Palace for the night. The next morning, he sent a large number of rewards to Yuzhang Palace under the pretext of appeasing noble Lord Yuxi. Eunuch Meng personally came to announce the decree. Everyone in Yuzhang Palace, who had been worried all night, was finally relieved. Mu Shi chose items that Shen Yu liked from the storeroom and rearranged Yuzhang Palace. Shinyu held a novel and read it outside while sunbathing. Imperial Physician Gu, whom he had not seen for many days, came to see him. Mushi knew that his master paid attention to Imperial Physician Gu, so he personally brought him over. I haven't seen you for many days. Is Imperial Physician Gu well? Shinyu raised his head from the novel and asked in a lazy voice. Imperial Physician Gu knelt down and saluted. This official thanks noble lord for saving my life. Imperial Physician Gu, what are you talking about? I have been staying in Yuzhang Palace all this time. How can I bear Imperial Physician Gu's saving grace? Shinyu tilted his head. Imperial Physician Gu, please rise. Shinyu's life-saving grace was not something that could be ignored just because he refused to admit it. Imperial Physician Gu also knew that there were many eyes in the palace. He listened to Shinyu and stood up. Please extend your hand. This official will take your pulse. Imperial Physician Gu stretched out his snow-white wrist from the wide sleeve. He looked straight at Shinyu and finished taking his pulse. Your pulse is stable. You can change to the next nursing prescription. Thank you, Imperial Physician Gu. This is this official's duty. If it was Imperial Physician Gu's duty to nurse Shinyu's body in the past as a doctor, from now on, there was an unspeakable kindness. Imperial Physician Gu became more and more concerned about Shinyu's physical condition. Imperial Physician Gu really appreciated Shinyu's kindness. If Shinyu had not announced that he was not allowed to treat other people, he would not have been able to help when those people came to beg for help. He would have lost his life for nothing. He escaped a disaster because of Shinyu's words. No matter what purpose Shinyu had for saying those words, it could not change the fact that had happened. According to His Majesty's attitude towards those people, if he really got involved in this matter, he was afraid that it would be difficult to escape being held accountable. If it was light, he would lose his official position. If it was heavy, he would lose his life. When Imperial Physician Gu left, he couldn't help but think, did Shingue Jun realize something when he said those words? When he returned to the Imperial Hospital, his familiar colleagues came to greet him. Imperial Physician Gu had always been very popular. Soon, many people gathered around him. Several people walked inside while discussing medical skills. Suddenly, there was a low voice of discussion not far away. This Shingue Jun is so beautiful that His Majesty promised that he would not accept any new people. More than that, I heard that he even threatened that he would kill as many people as they entered the palace. This is too. Does His Majesty let him do as he pleases? He is now favored. What does His Majesty not want? I heard that in order to appease this noble, His Majesty rewarded a lot of things to Yuzhang Palace. But he is just a man. He can't have children. Will His Majesty not have any descendants for his whole life because of him? Count Jinbei really made a profit by sending a charming legitimate son into the palace. In the future, he will have everything he wants. Imperial Physician Gu suddenly stopped. The person who was discussing a pathology with him was surprised. What's wrong? Please wait for me. After that, regardless of the doubtful expressions of his colleagues, he walked towards the group of people who were talking. The people who were left behind looked at each other. What's going on? I don't know. Let's go and have a look. Who allowed you to talk about the royal family's affairs? Imperial Physician Gu said coldly. The people who were talking excitedly suddenly stopped and lowered their heads guiltily. I know I was wrong. They were all small officials of the Imperial Hospital. Imperial Physician Gu was their immediate superior. Naturally, they did not want to offend him. Imperial Physician Gu wrote down their identities. Next time, don't let me hear you talk about these things. It was indeed inappropriate to talk about the royal family's private affairs. They nodded. The colleagues who followed Imperial Physician Gu became more and more confused. When did Imperial Physician Gu care about these trivial matters? After this incident, the world once again refreshed the degree of favor Shin Yu had. His Majesty was willing to empty the harem for him. It could be seen how deep his love was. Those ministers who wanted to send people to the harem had to give up the idea. His Majesty's attitude was already very obvious. If they really wanted to send people to the harem, there would be no more people sent in less than a day. Especially those who wanted to send their children to the harem, they no longer dared to say anything. They wanted people to enter the harem to fight for favor and give back to their families, not to send people to die. In the morning, the emperor expressed his attitude that he would not accept new people. After the morning court, Duke Shinbei walked out in a trance under the envious and jealous eyes of the ministers. Duke, someone approached. Duke Shinbei really taught a good son. Several people gathered around. Duke Shinbei, you have to persuade your noble son. As the emperor's people, how can he be so jealous? Yes, now His Majesty likes him, but if one day, Duke Shinbei was annoyed, his face became cold. Don't put on a good attitude for my son. If you have the ability, then let His Majesty only favor your daughter. After that, regardless of the face of the people who were insulted, he turned around and left. If it was in the past, he would be ecstatic that Shin Yu was so favored, but now he was not sure about Shin Yu's attitude towards the Duke Shinbei's mansion. Speaking of hostility towards the Duke Shinbei's mansion, other than Shin Qingran and his son, he did not do anything else. I have to find a time to test his attitude towards the Duke Shinbei's mansion, Duke Shinbei secretly decided. After the morning court, Shang Junlin went directly to Yuzhang Palace, followed by eunuch Meng, followed by two little eunuchs who were holding memorials. Since that day, His Majesty seemed to want to compensate Shin Guijun. Every day, except for the morning court, he would stay in Yuzhang Palace most of the time. Shin Yu was tending to a pot of light green flowers and plants. The branches and leaves were sharp, only half the height of a palm. It was planted in a white porcelain pot with light blue patterns. This grass grows very well. Mu Shi said. It has a name, it's called Junling. Shin Yu took the handkerchief Mu Shi handed over. It grows well, it should be able to survive this winter. Imperial physician Gu said that it can help sleep, is that true? Mu Shi was skeptical. No matter how she looked at it, it was an ordinary grass, except that its color was more tender than ordinary grass. Since Imperial physician Gu sent it here, it must be effective. Shin Yu looked at it for a while, then poured some water on it. Did you find out what happened to Imperial physician Gu? Imperial physician Gu's case involved the most sensitive topic at present. Whether it was Shin Yu or Imperial physician Gu himself, it was not convenient for them to talk about it to outsiders. Shin Yu still did not know why Imperial physician Gu was involved in the case and even lost his life because of it in his previous life. This servant. Mu Shi was about to answer when she was interrupted by a man who suddenly entered the door. Genius 1 second. Remember this website, www.biku50. CC Literature Mobile Version Reading Website, Biku50. CC. Chapter 16. It was not the first time that Mu Shi was interrupted by the emperor when he was talking to Shin Yu. Compared to his initial fear, he was now much calmer. Eunuch Meng, who came in behind Shang Junlin, ordered the palace servants to put down the booklets and took the lead to retreat. The palace servants also retreated one by one. In the blink of an eye, only Shin Yu and Shang Junlin were left in the room. Shin Yu looked at the empty room and walked to Shang Junlin. He raised his head and asked, "Will your Majesty tell me?" Shang Junlin looked at him calmly. "If your Majesty asks, I will tell you." "Does your Majesty really know?" Shin Yu was stunned. He thought that Shang Junlin said it deliberately. Imperial physician Gu was just an imperial physician. If he was not involved in Censor Zhang's case, Shang Junlin should not have spent so much effort to investigate him. Or was Imperial Physician Gu also involved in this matter in this life, but for some reason, he did not cause the same tragic consequences as in his previous life? The doubt in Shen Yu's eyes was too obvious. Shang Junlin frowned. What is your Majesty thinking? I'm wondering why your Majesty pays special attention to Imperial Physician Gu. Shen Yu blurted out. After he finished speaking, he realized that something was wrong and quickly remedied. No, I'm just curious why your Majesty knows so much about Imperial Physician Gu. Shen Yu's voice became fainter and fainter. Shang Junlin was so angry that he laughed. The inexplicable feeling in his heart just now was swept away. Then why does your Majesty think that I pay special attention to Imperial Physician Gu? Shang Junlin emphasized the word special. No matter what reason your Majesty pays special attention to Imperial Physician Gu, if it's because of some other reason, your Majesty should not think about it. Shen Yu looked at Shang Junlin's eyes with a burning gaze. What other reason could there be? Shang Junlin was about to ask, but he heard Shen Yu's next words. Your Majesty promised me that no new people will enter the harem. Shang Junlin asked incredulously, why do you think I have such thoughts? Otherwise, why would your Majesty pay attention to Imperial Physician Gu? Shen Yu calmly threw the question back. What else could it be? Of course, it's because of you. Shang Junlin suddenly reacted. He stroked Shen Yu's neck and squeezed it with a sense of oppression. Shen Guijun, you're quite bold. You're trying to trick me. Shen Yu didn't dodge. He lowered his eyes slightly and said, I'm just a little worried. After all, I only have your Majesty in this world. Shang Junlin caressed the skin on Shen Yu's neck. Suddenly, he forcefully pinched Shen Yu's chin, forcing him to raise his head. Don't play any tricks in front of me. Why would your Majesty think so? Shen Yu suddenly smiled. His eyes seemed to be full of light. I'm your Majesty's man now. Isn't it normal to be worried that your Majesty has another woman? Your Majesty, Shen Yu covered the man's hand, your Majesty's words are like gold. I'll take your words seriously. Shang Junlin's heart jumped. He let go of his hand as if he was scalded. He slightly averted his gaze. Of course, my words are like gold. Shen Yu knew when to stop. He took back his hand and returned to his usual gentle appearance. Your Majesty, can you tell me about Imperial Physician Gu? After all, after Imperial Physician Gu's treatment, my body is indeed much better than before. The following words were an explanation of why he cared about Imperial Physician Gu. I found that someone from that side had looked for Imperial Physician Gu. That's why I sent people to investigate. Shang Junlin looked deeply at Shen Yu. I'm curious. Why is your Majesty so sure that Imperial Physician Gu would be involved in Censor Zhang's case? No matter how good Imperial Physician Gu's medical skills were, he was just an Imperial physician without much power. Those who were involved in Censor Zhang's case were basically court officials. Logically, it shouldn't have much to do with an Imperial physician. Why did Shen Yu think that Imperial Physician Gu would be involved in this matter? This was what Shang Junlin couldn't figure out the most. Shen Yu didn't seem to feel Shang Junlin's probing. He leaned closer to Shang Junlin. Your Majesty, I'm a little cold. The man's body was very warm, like a big heater that could provide endless heat. This was also the reason why Shen Yu tacitly allowed Shang Junlin to stay in his bedroom. Shang Junlin looked around and found that the window had been blown open at some point. He used his internal strength to close the window and wrapped himself in a fox fur cloak. Are you feeling better? Shen Yu hugged the cloak and nodded. His body was weak, and Imperial Physician Gu also said that it was best not to let him catch a cold. Ordinary people could recover from a cold in a few days, but if Shen Yu caught a cold, it might take his life. Shang Junlin had seen him get sick once. He didn't know if it was because he was frightened or something else, but he specially ordered that the place where he stayed must be warm. Shen Yu was a person who would never treat himself unfairly. The living conditions in Yuzhang Palace were much more comfortable than other palaces. Sometimes Shen Yu even suspected that Shang Junlin worked and rested here because it was more comfortable to live here. Shang Junlin saw that Shen Yu's face was pale, so he poured a cup of hot tea for him. In this world, only Shen Guijun can be served by me. Your Majesty is so nice. Shen Yu took a few sips and felt his body temperature rise. His eyebrows relaxed. Your Majesty hasn't told me about Imperial Physician Gu. Shen Yu held the cup and looked at the man. Shang Junlin didn't expect that Shen Yu was still thinking about Imperial Physician Gu when he was not feeling well. He didn't care about other things and helplessly told him about it. He is a chess piece that the Zhang family buried in the palace many years ago. They wanted to use Imperial Physician Gu to spread the news outside the palace. If you didn't arrogantly ask Imperial Physician Gu to only treat you, Imperial Physician Gu would have fallen into the trap that was specially made for him the day after you said those words. Shang Junlin looked at Shen Yu meaningfully. Imperial Physician Gu's medical skills are paramount. If you didn't say it, he would definitely help others if they came to him. After you said it, he really declined the invitation to treat them. He listened to you. Isn't this borrowing His Majesty's power? If it weren't for His Majesty's favor to me, Imperial Physician Gu wouldn't listen to me. Shen Yu knew better than anyone that if his identity wasn't Shen Guijun, and if he didn't give a suitable reason, Imperial Physician Gu wouldn't listen to him. You can say anything. Shang Junlin shook his head. This is good. With this favor, Imperial Physician Gu will only pay more attention to your illness. After I met Your Majesty, everything became better. Your Majesty is my lucky star. According to what you said, you are my lucky star. If it weren't for you, Imperial Physician Zhang's case wouldn't have progressed so smoothly. After Imperial Physician Zhang's crimes were announced, the forces that opposed Shang Junlin in court were extinguished. When the 15-day deadline was up, official Fang had just finished the trial of Imperial Physician Zhang's case. The officials involved were all imprisoned one by one and sentenced according to the severity of their crimes. As the mastermind, the Zhang family was sentenced to 9 generations of extermination, and Imperial Physician Zhang himself was killed. There were many other officials who were convicted. Shang Junlin acted quickly and used this case to uproot Imperial Physician Zhang's influence in court. The poem that the Zhang family left in the palace was a concubine of the previous emperor. She was young, had no children, and had no connection to the Zhang family. She had always kept a low profile. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to escape from the purge when Shang Junlin ascended the throne. After Shang Junlin ascended the throne, he allowed the concubines of the previous emperor to leave. Those who didn't want to leave lived in a remote palace. Most of these people didn't have prominent backgrounds, so they didn't have a good place to go. At least they didn't have to worry about food and drink in the palace. Is Beauty Su really a member of the Zhang family? Shen Yu felt that it wasn't so simple. Shang Junlin frowned. She is too cautious. We only found that she had some connections with the Zhang family, but we couldn't find out who she was working for. Shen Yu was puzzled. His Majesty didn't ask anyone to interrogate her. She ate and lived with those people. If she disappeared for no reason, it would definitely arouse the vigilance of the people behind the scenes, Shang Junlin explained. Shen Yu, does Your Majesty usually see those people? Shang Junlin, occasionally, but I didn't put them under house arrest. Shen Yu, other than the palace where they live, where else would they usually appear? Shang Junlin, why are you asking this? Shen Yu supported his chin and said, Your Majesty, if I say that I have a way for you to take them away for interrogation without arousing suspicion, but I just need Your Majesty to cooperate, will Your Majesty cooperate? Noticing Shang Junlin's puzzled gaze, Shen Yu leaned over to the man's ear and whispered a few words. Qin Garden was a place where the previous emperor liked to bring his concubines to play. After Shang Junlin ascended the throne, the harem was abandoned. Except for the previous emperor's concubines, very few people would come here. Not all those who stayed in the palace were resigned to their fate. There were a few beauties who were brought in by the previous emperor during the latter part of his reign. They wanted to rely on their beauty to fight for themselves. However, the new emperor was completely different from the previous emperor. He was a master who didn't get close to beauties. After a few bold ones were executed, the rest of them temporarily settled down. It wasn't until Shen Yu entered the palace that a few ambitious ones became restless. After dressing up, they went to Qin Garden together. This was the only place where they could meet the emperor by chance without being conspicuous. Today's weather was good and the sun was shining brightly. Shen Yu had been bored in the palace for a long time and wanted to go out for a walk. Shang Junlin had finished his official business and accompanied him. Today's weather is warm. Your Majesty, let's go to a few places that I haven't been to before. Seeing Shang Junlin nodding his head, Shen Yu turned his head and asked, Eunuch Meng, is there any place in the palace with good scenery? Eunuch Meng had been in the palace for a long time and was very familiar with the palace. He introduced one by one to Shen Yu. If you want to talk about beautiful scenery, Fang Garden is very good. However, the flowers planted there only bloom in summer. In winter, Qin Garden scenery is the most beautiful. After listening to Eunuch Meng's introduction, Shen Yu chose to go to Qin Garden. Shen Yu and Shang Junlin whispered to each other. Eunuch Meng and his men followed them from a distance to avoid disturbing the two masters. Your Majesty, before Shen Yu could finish his words, a person suddenly bumped into him from the corner. Shang Junlin didn't have time to think. He grabbed Shen Yu's arm and pulled her into his arms. That person just happened to bump into Shang Junlin. The woman's eyes were covered with a white cloth. She grabbed Shang Junlin's clothes with one hand and pulled the white cloth off her face with the other. She said in a clear voice, I caught you. The rest of her words were swallowed when she saw the scene in front of her. The woman quickly let go and knelt down. Your Majesty, please forgive me. I didn't know it was Your Majesty. I didn't mean to offend you. She used the opportunity of playing hide and seek to bump into the emperor. There were too few opportunities to interact with the emperor. She didn't want to let go of any opportunity. Whether it was for herself or for that person's request, she had to get along with Shang Junlin. After a long time, the woman didn't hear any sound. She carefully raised her head and saw that the emperor didn't even look at her. He was gently tidying up Shen Yu's hair. When she looked at Shen Yu again, he was smiling and didn't seem angry. She immediately felt relieved. However, before she could breathe a sigh of relief, she saw the smiling Shen Guijun walk in front of her. Ah! Shen Yu seemed to be in a difficult position. It was this hand that touched Your Majesty. I don't like it when others touch my things. How about this? If you touched it, you can leave it there. How about that? Genius 1 second. Remember this website, www.biku50. CC Literature Mobile Version Reading Website, Biku50. CC. Chapter 17. She looked at the young man standing in front of her in disbelief. The young man had a jade-like face and a spring breeze smile on his face, but that smile didn't reach his eyes. The young man's pupils were very dark, and the place where he stood blocked the light. His eyes were like a deep abyss. Fear crept up her spine. She clearly realized that the young man was serious about what he said. He would really fulfill his promise. How could he be so bold? Even in front of the emperor, he didn't hide his possessiveness. Since ancient times, which emperor could stand the person sleeping next to him with such a temper? Wasn't he afraid that the emperor would hate him? The woman looked at the emperor standing behind the young man with the last bit of hope. Her heart sank little by little. No wonder Shin Yu could be so unscrupulous. It turned out that he was indulged. Why aren't you talking? Are you dissatisfied with my treatment? Shin Yu's voice fell. The woman's face paled even more. She resisted the fear and said in a trembling voice, "This concubine doesn't dare." "I think you dare." Shin Yu narrowed his eyes and looked at the woman kneeling on the ground. Her face was like a lotus flower with a pair of lovely eyes. She had the innocence of a young girl and the charm of a mature woman. She was only in her 20s. No wonder she had such thoughts. Did something happen to Sister Ling? Why don't I see her? She just seemed to go that way. Why don't we go and see? The woman called out as she walked. Her voice came from afar. Shin Yu turned his head and looked at Shang Junlin. Seeing him nod, he knew that their target was in this group of people. Shin Yu slightly leaned to the side. When the women arrived, they could see the tall and straight figure of Shang Junlin. Everyone was stunned. They didn't have time to think about why the emperor suddenly appeared here. They quickly saluted. Those who had other thoughts took advantage of the salute to show their advantage. Shin Yu silently looked at these people and took in their movements. Finally, his eyes slowly fell on an inconspicuous woman. Compared to the others, this woman's appearance wasn't particularly outstanding. It was just that her appearance was very pleasing to the eye. She wore a light blue dress. Among the beautiful women, she was very inconspicuous. Lin Jilan was the woman who was implicated in Censor Zhang's case. Shang Junlin's attitude today was different from usual. Although he was still cold, he did not give off the feeling of being unapproachable. Those who were braver could not help but want to fight for themselves. Looking at the young emperor who was almost surrounded by beauties, Shin Yu's eyes gradually darkened. The woman who was kneeling on the ground looked at the scene in front of her in horror. Just now, she had accidentally bumped into the emperor and was almost killed by Shin Yu. Now, there were so many people fawning over the emperor, the woman couldn't help but start to regret. If she had known that Shin Yu was this crazy, she wouldn't have acted so rashly. Your Majesty is really popular. A slightly playful voice sounded. The women looked in the direction of the voice and saw Shin Yu standing not far away, looking at them coldly. His heart skipped a beat. For some reason, an ominous premonition arose in his heart. Your Highness, come to my side. Shang Junlin's eyes darkened. No one knew what he was thinking. Shin Yu walked over and stood beside the man. He tilted his head slightly. Your Majesty, who are these people? They are the imperial concubines of the previous emperor. So they are the imperial concubines of the previous emperor. Why are all of their eyes on your Majesty? Those who don't know would think that they are your Majesty's imperial concubines. The place where Shin Yu was originally standing happened to be covered. These women were so focused on the emperor that they didn't notice that in addition to the emperor, Shin Yu was also here. No one thought that Shin Yu would directly expose their thoughts. Their faces turned red and white. Your Highness, this concubine is here to find Sister Ling. When one person spoke, the rest of the people seemed to have found their backbone and spoke one after another. Yes, we saw that Sister Ling didn't appear. We were worried about her, so, Shin Yu listened quietly for a while, then raised his chin and said with a smile, you are looking for that person. Following Shin Yu's line of sight, they saw the pale-faced woman kneeling on the ground. I don't know what Sister Ling did wrong. It's nothing, Shin Yu said lightly. It's just that when I saw her fall into your Majesty's arms, I wasn't in a good mood. The people who originally wanted to speak for the woman to show their kindness shut their mouths. If it was for other reasons, they could still plead for leniency. If it was really as Shin Yu said, they would be stupid to plead for leniency. What are you doing? Didn't you hear what I just said? Shin Yu was half leaning on Shang Junlin's body. His eyes were half closed, and his voice was full of displeasure. Several little eunuchs heard this and approached the woman kneeling on the ground. Regardless of the woman's struggle, they grabbed her arm. Your Majesty, Your Highness, please spare my life. This concubine was insensible. This concubine didn't mean it. Please, Your Highness, please spare my life. The strong smell of blood spread, and the blood on the ground swam. The woman fell down holding her arm. She was in so much pain that she couldn't speak. This is the result of coveting someone who shouldn't be coveting. A slightly cold voice sounded. The women couldn't help but tremble. After witnessing such a scene with their own eyes, they didn't dare to have any other thoughts. Shin Yu's meaningful gaze swept over the women who were as honest as quails. According to the rules of the palace, how should they be dealt with? According to the severity of the case, they should be imprisoned or given white silk and poisoned wine. Eunuch Meng replied. Your Majesty, please spare my life. Your Highness, please spare my life. Of course, they knew how serious the consequences of failure were. However, riches and honor came from danger. Compared to wasting their lives in the harem without any hope, they would rather take a gamble. And that person had said that as long as they could succeed, they could have glory, splendor, wealth, fame, and power in the future. They could have whatever they wanted. The only thing they didn't expect was that Shin Yu would make a move. In the face of life and death, how could they care about anything else? They just wanted to live. Shin Yu didn't really want to kill them. He deliberately pretended to be relaxed. The people who were begging for mercy saw hope. We beg Your Highness to spare our lives. We promise that we will absolutely behave ourselves in the future. We won't come out to be an eyesore to Your Highness. Shin Yu pondered for a moment, then take them to Yuzhang Palace. When I've vented my anger, maybe I'll let you go. Everyone quickly thanked him. After bringing them back to Yuzhang Palace, Shin Yu locked them up in different places. The people who had just been greatly frightened didn't dare to have any objections. They followed Shin Yu's arrangement. Lin Jilan was secretly taken away by Shang Junlin's people. Except for Shin Yu himself, no one else in Yuzhang Palace knew about it. As Shin Yu thought, the people behind the scenes didn't find anything wrong at all. There was a rumor that Shin Yu didn't allow Shang Junlin to take concubines. Those who got the news thought that Shin Yu brought them back to Yuzhang Palace to better torture them. Shin Yu was too lazy to care about what others thought. After handing them over to Shang Junlin, he no longer cared about this matter. Among the people who were brought back, Lin Jilan was not the only one who had problems. If they didn't receive someone's order, why would they want to get close to Shang Junlin? Mu Shi brought the medicine. Young master, it's time to take the medicine. Shin Yu brought it over and drank it in one gulp. Mu Shi handed over a handkerchief. Young master, Count Jinbei wants to see you. Why does he suddenly want to see me? Shin Yu remembered that he had asked Mu Shi to arrange people to go to Count Jinbei's mansion. What's the situation in Count Jinbei's mansion now? After this servant sent people there, concubine Ru, who originally had a better relationship with Count Jinbei, somehow angered Count Jinbei and was grounded. Shin Qingran's application was also changed back to the treatment of a concubine's son. Now the mansion is managed by a concubine who doesn't get along with concubine Ru and her son. Mu Shi explained the current situation of Count Jinbei's mansion. After hearing it, Shin Yu said, "Tell Count Jinbei that I will find time to see him." Yes. In the evening, Shang Junlin came over. Shin Yu told him about Count Jinbei. You want to go out of the palace? Shang Junlin frowned. After all, he is my father. It's not good to not see him. Shin Yu lowered his eyes. How come I didn't know that your highness and Count Jinbei have such a deep relationship? Shang Junlin raised his eyebrows. It's okay to fool others, but you used it to fool me, huh? Your Majesty, I haven't returned to the mansion for a long time. I miss the mansion. Your highness doesn't have to pretend in front of me. Shang Junlin lifted his chin. I know how your highness used to live in Count Jinbei's mansion. I think that your highness wouldn't want to return to Count Jinbei's mansion no matter where you want to go, right? Actually. Shinyu blinked and said slowly, I heard that Shin Qingran and her son, who have always flaunted their power in Count Jinbei's mansion, have been unlucky recently. I wanted to go and see the fun. It was a pity that he didn't see the two's unlucky faces with his own eyes. Wouldn't it be better if your highness was so frank earlier? Shang Junlin held Shinyu's chin and shook it. Shinyu reached out to free his chin. Did your majesty agree? Yes. Without waiting for Shinyu to speak, Shang Junlin added, I'll go with you. Shinyu didn't leave the palace just to go to Count Jinbei's mansion. Count Jinbei's mansion was just a side trip. If Shang Junlin went with him, he wouldn't be able to do what he wanted to do. He tactfully refused, Your Majesty, aren't you very busy recently? I don't want to waste your Majesty's time. Your Highness doesn't want me to go with you. Shang Junlin narrowed his eyes and approached Shinyu with a sense of oppression. Why? I'm very happy that your Majesty can accompany me. How can I not be willing? Shinyu reached out and put his hand on the man's shoulder. The faint smell of medicine filled the tip of his nose, mixed with a faint fragrance. Shang Junlin's eyes darkened, and he stepped back along with Shinyu's strength. I'll let Meng Chang prepare to go to Count Jinbei's mansion. Your Highness, you should rest early. Shang Junlin went to wash up. Shinyu stared at the bed curtain and was worried. He originally planned to meet with his subordinates, find a birthday gift for Shang Junlin, and then go to Count Jinbei's mansion to see what was going on. If he left the palace with Shang Junlin, he could only go to Count Jinbei's mansion. What are you thinking about? Shang Junlin came back with steam all over his body. I'm thinking about something, Shinyu said in a low voice. Does your Majesty have anything you want? Why are you asking this? Nothing, I'm just asking. Shinyu didn't really expect to get an answer. He yawned and leaned toward the heat source. Genius 1 second. Remember this website, www.biku50. CC Literature Mobile Version Reading URL, biku50. CC. Chapter 18. Mushi, if you want to give someone a birthday gift, what should you give them? Shinyu held a teacup and asked the maid who was tying up his hair. Is young master going to give Her Majesty a gift? Mushi thought for a moment. It seemed that the only person who could make Shinyu ask this question recently was Her Majesty. Sort of. Shinyu didn't deny it. But, young master, haven't you already made a list of gifts? After Mushi mentioned it, Shinyu remembered that he did ask Mushi to handle the birthday gifts. Bring me the list of gifts. I'll take a look. Yes. Mushi finished her work and went to get the list of gifts in person. Young master, this is the preliminary list of gifts. Shinyu took the list of gifts and looked through it from beginning to end. He couldn't find anything wrong with it, but he wanted to give something other than what was on the list. Shinyu tapped the table regularly with his knuckles and skimmed through his memory one by one. He tentatively decided on a few items. He still needed to think about the specifics. Early the next morning, Shinyu felt the warmth beside him and opened his eyes in confusion. Your Majesty. Shang Junlin was holding a booklet and reading it while leaning on the bed. You're awake. A low voice came from above. Shinyu rubbed his ears. Your Majesty, aren't you going to court today? Usually, when he woke up, Shang Junlin would have already gone to court. If it wasn't for the fact that it was bright outside, Shin Yu would have thought that it was still very early. Today is a day off. Shang Junlin put down the booklet in his hand. Didn't you say that you were going to Count Bei's residence? Shin Yu's muddled mind gradually cleared. He sat up with the quilt in his arms. I almost forgot if your majesty didn't mention it. It was obvious that he didn't care about going to Count Bei's residence at all. Shang Junlin was speechless. I told you last night. Shin Yu recalled what had happened last night. It seemed that Shang Junlin had mentioned it, but he had been thinking about something else recently and had subconsciously ignored it. Seeing that Shin Yu had woken up, Shang Junlin called for someone to come in and serve him. After washing up, they changed into comfortable clothes. Shang Junlin did not wear the clothes that represented his status as an emperor. Instead, he chose a black robe that did not reveal his identity. Shin Yu wore a light-colored robe with a snow-white fox fur coat on the outside. Your Majesty, are you going to hide your identity and leave the palace? Shin Yu looked at the man who was dressed like an ordinary person, and his eyes lit up. Shang Junlin had an impeccable face with sword-like eyebrows and starry eyes. His facial features were sharp, and there was not a single part of him that was not perfect. Without the luxurious clothes that represented his status as an emperor, he looked even more youthful and handsome. Shin Yu could accept to stay in the harem and cooperate with Shang Junlin mainly because of Shang Junlin's face. The more he looked at Shang Junlin's face, the more he felt that Shang Junlin's face suited his aesthetic. Shang Junlin explained, it is not convenient for me to leave the palace with my real identity. Shin Yu could understand. Although Censor Zhang's case was closed, there were still many suspicious points behind the scenes. In fact, there was no need for Shang Junlin to accompany him to the residence of Jinbei at this time. The carriage drove out quietly from the side door. Shin Yu sat opposite Shang Junlin. Your Majesty, there is no need to go to the residence of Jinbei with me. Since I have promised you, how can I regret it? Even in the not spacious carriage, Shang Junlin sat up straight. Although the carriage was not big, the decoration inside was very comfortable. Shin Yu sat on a thick blanket and hugged the heater in his hand, so he did not feel cold at all. The residents of Jinbei had received the news that Shin Yu was coming back early in the morning. Everyone was prepared and waiting for Shin Yu's arrival. An inconspicuous carriage slowly approached. Jinbei Ho had received the news that Shin Yu's return this time was not to visit relatives, so there was no need to arrange a ceremonial carriage. Seeing that it was a small carriage, he did not dare to neglect it. After entering the courtyard, the carriage stopped. The first to get off was a tall man. Jinbei Ho was about to speak, but when he saw the man's face, he knelt down with a plop. Don't make it public. Shang Junlin said coldly. Yes. Jinbei Ho wiped the non-existent sweat on his forehead and stood up. His fear of Shang Junlin was deeply imprinted in his heart. Jinbei Ho had seen Shang Junlin's cruel side when he massacred the imperial court. Since then, his fear of Shang Junlin had never lessened. The curtain of the carriage was lifted, and a white hand stretched out from the carriage. Jinbei Ho widened his eyes and watched the emperor who made him afraid gently carry the young man out of the carriage. Father, why don't you feel happy to see me? Jinbei Ho, who was in a trance, looked at Shin Yu and then at Shang Junlin. He wondered if he was blind. His Majesty not only accompanied Shin Yu back to the residence, but also carried him out of the carriage. Hearing Shin Yu's voice, Jinbei Ho twitched the corner of his mouth. I'm just too surprised. It was not that he had not heard the news about how his son was favored in the palace, but hearing it was not as impactful as seeing it with his own eyes. Jinbei Ho tried his best to calm down and led them to the hall. With Shang Junlin present, Jinbei Ho did not ask Shin Yu what he thought of the Ho Fu. The three of them chatted in the hall for a while. Shen Yu was very bored, so he pulled Shang Junlin's sleeve and whispered, "Your Majesty, do you want to see the place where I lived since I was a child?" The three of them were not far away, so Jinbei Ho naturally heard it. He was about to scold him, but when he saw Shang Junlin's cold eyes, he swallowed the words he was about to say. Jinbei Ho suddenly realized that the emperor was still the same emperor. The unique accommodation was only for a specific person. "You're right. I'll take you two there." "No need." Shang Junlin stood up. Shen Yu also stood up and walked out with Shang Junlin. Jinbei Ho subconsciously wanted to follow them, but he was stopped by Eunuch Meng, who stayed behind. "Marquis, please wait." Eunuch Meng smiled, but his attitude was very firm. Eunuch Meng was the emperor's favorite person. Jinbei Ho knew that this was also the emperor's intention, so he did not dare to disobey. Looking at the backs of the two people leaving, Jinbei Ho's heart was filled with deep regret. If he had paid more attention to Shen Yu, he would not have to worry about the future of the Jinbei Ho Fu. Perhaps knowing that Shen Yu was coming back, the small courtyard where Shen Yu lived was no different from when he left. Shen Yu walked around slowly with people and pointed to the frozen small pond. "In summer, the pond will be full of lotus flowers. They are very beautiful, and the lotus seeds are also very delicious. There are also lotus ponds in the palace. If you like them, I'll take you there to pick them in summer." "Your Majesty, why are you so nice?" The two of them talked for a while, and Shen Yu lazily yawned. "If you're sleepy, go to sleep." Shang Junlin frowned as he caught the young man who almost fell. "Your Majesty, do you want to come together?" Shen Yu narrowed his eyes and raised his head to ask. "Yes." The two of them rested for half an hour. Shen Yu was full of energy and remembered that there was still one thing he had not done. "I heard that my brother broke his leg. Your Majesty, do you think I should go and see him?" Shen Yu held his chin and looked slightly worried. If people who did not know the truth saw this, they would probably think that he was really worried about his brother's health. Shang Junlin was sitting at the table and was reading the story that Shen Yu used to read. His wide sleeves were spread out on the table. When he heard Shen Yu's words, he turned his head and looked over. His eyes were very dark, like a bottomless abyss. At this moment, his eyes were dyed with a warm color under the sunlight, giving people an illusion of deep affection. "Didn't you come to seek your brother? I hope you won't be disappointed when you see him. How can your Majesty think of me like this?" Shen Yu walked to the man's side and bent down slightly. He lowered his head and whispered in the man's ear, "Your Majesty, I will be sad." Shang Junlin pulled Shen Yu's wrist and pulled him into his arms. He lowered his head and said, "If your brother's injury is not as serious as you think, I think you will be disappointed." "Your Majesty really knows me." Shen Yu blinked his eyes and said, "Does your Majesty want to come together?" "Since your Majesty invited me, I will naturally be disrespectful." The Count of Jinbei's residence was so big that the news of Shen Yu's return could not be hidden. In just a few minutes, from the front courtyard to the back courtyard, everyone knew that Shen Yu had returned. Count of Jinbei did not have a wife, so the concubines were not qualified to welcome guests in the front hall. If it was Madame Ru in the past, she was barely qualified. Since Shen Yu's incident, her status in the Count of Jinbei's residence had plummeted. She was even worse than the other concubines. When she heard the news of Shen Yu's return, she was visiting Shen Qingran in the side courtyard. After Shen Qingran broke his leg, he was ordered to recuperate by Count of Jinbei. It was said that he was recuperating, but it was actually a disguised house arrest. The courtyard he lived in was also changed. Shen Qingran could not understand why things developed like this. It was clear that Shen Yu was no longer in the Count of Jinbei's residence, but he still had such a big impact on the Count of Jinbei's residence. "Mother, did he really return?" Shen Qingran grabbed Madame Ru's hand with a gloomy expression. Yes, but I heard that he came back in an ordinary carriage. It seems that the rumors outside are not true. Every time she heard the news of how Shin Yu was favored in the palace, Madame Ru's regret increased. If she had known earlier, she would not have pushed the opportunity to enter the palace to Shin Yu. I knew that he would not have such a good life. Mother, what should we do now? You said before that you met a noble person, Madame Ru firmly grabbed her son's hand. There are not many opportunities for us to seize now. You must seize this opportunity. Tell mother, what is the identity of that noble person? How far have you two progressed? Hearing Madame Ru's words, Shin Qingran's expression changed. For now, he could only guess that the person was a member of the imperial family. That person had never told him his true identity. As for the relationship between the two, thinking of the person that he could not contact recently, Shin Qingran's expression became more unsightly. Noticing Shin Qingran's unsightly expression, Madame Ru had a bad premonition. She hesitantly opened her mouth. Mother, don't worry, Shin Qingran gritted his teeth, I will not let Shin Yu have an easy time. I didn't expect that little brother Qingran would still think of me when he was sick. How touching. A teasing voice sounded. Shin Qingran and his mother looked up. They saw Shin Yu and a man in black standing intimately together. The servant stood behind them, trembling. They did not know how long they had been there. Little brother, you should be careful of your other leg. Shin Yu's voice carried a smile, but the malice in his tone was not concealed. Shin Yu. Shin Qingran was so angry that his vision turned black. Looking at the intimate posture of the two people, he suddenly laughed. Does His Majesty know that you left the palace to meet your lover in private? Meet my lover in private? Shin Yu tilted his head. Are you referring to him? Genius 1 second. Remember this website, www.biku50. CC Literature Mobile Version Reading Website, Biku50. CC. Chapter 19. The news of Shang Junlin coming to the residence of Count Bei was a secret. Count Bei knew that the emperor didn't want to make it public, so he didn't tell the residents about the emperor's visit. Shin Qingran and his mother only got the news that Shin Yu returned to the residence of Count Bei. It was impossible for them to think that the emperor would personally accompany Shin Yu back to the residence of Count Bei. In the residence of Count Bei, only a few people knew what the emperor looked like. Concubine Ru wasn't qualified to enter the palace, so she didn't see what the emperor looked like. Shang Junlin came to the residence of Count Bei for the first time, so the servants didn't know him. When they heard Shin Qingran's question, they couldn't help but look at him. Shin Qingran just blurted it out because he was angry, but he felt it was inappropriate after he said it. What he didn't expect was that after he said it, Shin Yu's actions became more unscrupulous. Regardless of everyone's strange look, Shin Yu hung himself on Shang Junlin. Shang Junlin subconsciously reached out to protect him. Shin Yu, how can you be so shameless? Concubine Ru put on the airs of an elder. Now that you've entered the palace, you're one of the emperor's people. How can you use the excuse of returning to the residence of Count Bei to have a private meeting with someone else? Even if you don't think for yourself, you have to think for the residence of Count Bei. If the emperor blames you, do you want to drag the entire residence of Count Bei down with you? It seemed to be a lesson for the younger generation, but in fact, every sentence contained strong malice. Concubine Ru dared to say this because she and Shin Qingran both knew that Shin Yu had a close friend before entering the palace. At first, Shin Yu resisted entering the palace because of this person. According to Shin Yu's crazy behavior before entering the palace, they didn't doubt that Shin Yu would have a private meeting with a lover. Maybe he had such an idea from the beginning. Otherwise, how could it explain why Shin Yu suddenly agreed to enter the palace? Concubine Ru thought that she had found a reasonable explanation, so she spoke more firmly. Shin Yu, it's not that I, as a concubine, want to scold you. You also know that you are only a concubine. Shin Yu's tone changed. It seems that you also know your identity. Otherwise, I would have thought that you, concubine Ru, had become the legal wife of Duke Bei. Shin Yu deliberately emphasized the word concubine with a strong sense of sarcasm. It was as if the concubine was holding her heaving chest and her eyes were red with anger. Shin Yu admired concubine Ru's expression with great interest for a while. He tilted his head and rubbed against Shang Junlin. Even if I'm not the lord personally conferred by His Majesty, I'm still the legitimate son of the Count of Jinbei. How can a concubine call me by my name? Ah Lin, don't you agree? Ah Lin. It was the first time that Shang Junlin heard Shin Yu call him so intimately. His heart trembled. He lowered his eyes and his long eyelashes covered his eyes. His voice was low and gentle. Yes, she should respect you. The intimate scene of the two people acting as if there was no one else around provoked Shin Qingran. He grabbed the quilt and sat up. Are you here to laugh at me? Taking advantage of His Majesty's favor, you do whatever you want. I want to see what will happen to you when His Majesty finds out what you have done and blames you. You don't have to worry about that. If I really angered His Majesty because of this, His Majesty will be furious. Everyone in the Duke Bei's mansion will suffer with me. Instead of worrying about me, you should worry about yourself. Shin Yu. You did it on purpose, didn't you? That's right. You see, either you help me hide it from His Majesty, or we'll all be punished together, so that I won't be alone. Shin Yu played with the man's fingers and said casually. Don't you care about him? Shin Qingran was shocked by Shin Yu's attitude. He turned his head and looked at the man who was acting intimately with Shin Yu. You know that he is His Majesty's man. Why do you disregard your future and get involved with him? Shang Junlin gave a short laugh and touched Shin Yu's feather-like long hair. He is still willing to be with me. I am already very satisfied. Aren't you afraid that your whole family will be punished because of him? Shin Qingran widened his eyes in disbelief. He couldn't believe that this man with an extraordinary temperament was actually a love-struck fool. As long as I can make him happy, I don't care what I do. Shang Junlin stared at the young man in front of him. His eyes were soft, as if he only had eyes for the young man. Shin Qingran was so shocked that he couldn't speak. Besides being shocked, he couldn't help but feel jealous. The person he liked didn't come to see him even once when he was sick. Even their messages were few and far between. Why could Shin Yu easily get the love of two outstanding men? Obviously, he was the one who had transmigrated. He should be the protagonist of this world. Are you envious of me? Oh, no, are you jealous of me? Shin Yu approached him step by step. His voice was soft but cold. Are you feeling very indignant? Do you feel that I robbed you of the opportunity to enter the palace? Are you thinking that if you were the one who entered the palace, everything I have now would be yours? I didn't. Shin Qingran couldn't help but shrink back. He rarely confronted Shin Yu face to face. The only two times Shin Yu had scared him. No, that's what you think. Shin Yu pinched his chin and forced him to look at him. Your eyes tell me that you are jealous of my identity as the legitimate son. You are jealous of the men I met. You are jealous of me. Shut up. Shin Qingran awkwardly turned his head and pushed Shin Yu away. Shin Yu's words were like an axe that cut through his hard disguise, revealing his embarrassing inner self. The dirty and unbearable thoughts in his heart were exposed under the sun. Shin Yu took back his hand and stepped back. Shin Qingran. How can you be so rude to the noble prince? Quickly apologize. Jinbei Ho, who had rushed over after hearing the news, saw the scene before he entered the room. There's no need to apologize. Shin Yu walked to Shang Junlin's side, took the handkerchief from his hand and wiped his hand. what can he do to me lying there? Shin Qingran was angry, but he didn't dare to say anything. He didn't understand why his father, who had always doted on Shin Yu, was biased towards Shin Yu when it was obvious that it was Shin Yu who was in the wrong. Was it really like what Shin Yu said, that the entire Zhenbei Hou Fu was covering for Shin Yu? Zhenbei Hou looked at Shang Junlin awkwardly. Shang Junlin had accompanied Shin Yu back to the Fu with his identity concealed. Without his permission, Zhenbei Hou didn't dare to reveal his identity. He could only ask, "What happened?" He said that I met my lover in private and ruined the family's reputation. Shin Yu began to count with his fingers. Sir Zhenbei's vision darkened. His Majesty was still here. Shin Qingran was seeking death by saying such words. If His Majesty blamed the Lord Protector's mansion for this. No, he couldn't let such a thing happen. Zhenbei Hou didn't know what happened before he came. Looking at the situation in the room, it didn't seem like there was an irreparable conflict. There should still be a chance to save the situation. He suppressed his anger and said, "Noble Prince, Qingran is still young and has been spoiled by me. He speaks without thinking, it's time to teach him a lesson." Shang Junlin stroked Shin Yu's long hair and said in a low voice. Zhenbei Hou didn't expect Shang Junlin to suddenly speak. He was stunned and looked at him carefully. However, Shang Junlin didn't even look at him. Zhenbei Hou couldn't tell what Shang Junlin's attitude was, so he could only agree. After watching enough, Shin Yu planned to leave. Before leaving, he looked back and smiled. "Father, don't forget what you promised me before you left." Zhenbei Hou was shocked. He remembered that Shin Yu was talking about Shin Qingran and his mother. Now that Shin Yu was favored, he certainly couldn't offend his son. No matter how many thoughts he had, he could only suppress them. "I won't forget." After Shin Yu left, Zhenbei Hou ignored the sad eyes of Shin Qingran and his mother. He learned what happened from the servant and left with a sullen face. Concubine Ru rushed over and grabbed the hem of his clothes. "Master Hou, Ren, really didn't mean it." He was confused by anger. Shin Yu, no, noble prince brazenly took another man for a private meeting in the Zhenbei Hou Fu. He wanted to harm the whole Zhenbei Hou Fu. Duke Zhenbei kicked him away. "Are you stupid? You believe everything he says. Why don't you think about it? The palace is heavily guarded, and he returned to the Marquis mansion temporarily. How can he have time to communicate with the lover you are talking about? That person is..." Concubine Ru looked up in disbelief. Zhenbei Hou didn't have the patience to continue to argue with her, so he impatiently said, "It's what you think. It's already that person's mercy that he didn't punish you." This concubine really didn't know. Concubine Ru's tone was absent-minded. "You and your son should reflect on yourself here. In the future, without my order, you can't step out of the courtyard." Originally, because Shin Qingran was smart and knew how to please him, Zhenbei Hou didn't mind taking care of his son. But now, Shin Yu, who was favored by the emperor, was in front of him. He had to temporarily give up Shin Qingran. He had to find a way to find out His Majesty's attitude and whether this matter had a bad impression of the Zhenbei Hou Fu. If there was, Shin Qingran and his son couldn't be left alive. Zhenbei Hou didn't find a chance to sound out Shin Yu and Shang Junlin's words. Without a summons, he didn't dare to approach them directly. He waited and waited until he heard that the two of them had returned to the palace. He didn't know if it was because Shin Yu had stayed outside for too long, but he faintly showed signs of fever. After returning to the palace, Shang Junlin immediately called for the imperial physician. After Shin Yu drank a bowl of warm medicine, he finally relaxed. "Take care of your own body." Shang Junlin frowned and looked at Shin Yu. When they were in the palace, Shin Yu didn't have many chances to catch a cold because he kept himself warm. He didn't expect that he would almost fall ill after leaving the palace for less than half a day. Shang Junlin realized for the first time how fragile Shen Yu's body was. Shen Yu smiled and moved closer to the man. He pressed down on his hand that was holding the pen to write the memorial. Don't we have His Majesty? I can't watch over you all the time. If your Majesty doesn't watch over me, who else would you watch over? Shen Yu sat on the small table where Shang Junlin put the memorial and looked down at Shang Junlin. What nonsense are you talking about? Who else would I watch over other than you? Shang Junlin picked up the long hair that fell in front of him. Are you happy today? Shen Yu tilted his head and smiled. Of course I'm happy when I'm with your Majesty. Although some things didn't work out, Shen Yu was really happy when he saw Shen Qingran and his mother's unlucky appearance. I don't think you're happy because I'm with you. Your Majesty saw through it but didn't say it out loud. Shen Yu's eyebrows curved. Then, are you happy today? And, how does your Majesty feel when you're regarded as my secret lover who met outside the palace? Genius 1 second. Remember this website, www.biku50. CC Literature Mobile Version Reading URL, biku50. CC. Chapter 20. Could it be that you have other lovers besides me? Shang Junlin grabbed the young man's arm and leaned closer to him. Of course not. Shen Yu rolled his eyes. In this world, who can be better than your Majesty? Shang Junlin suddenly remembered the secret report from the hidden dragon guards before Shen Yu entered the palace. Shang Junlin's eyes darkened. Don't lie to me. Your Majesty should have confidence in yourself. Otherwise, you should have confidence in my eyesight. Why would I give up your Majesty's Dragon Ball and choose the fish eye? Shen Yu raised the corners of his lips. My eyesight is good. Your Majesty really has good vision. You can even see that someone is trying to break into the prison. Shang Junlin's tone was calm as if he just said it casually. Shen Yu wasn't stupid enough to think that Shang Junlin was praising him. He knew that he couldn't get away with it so easily. All kinds of thoughts flashed through his mind, but he didn't show it on his face. It was as if he didn't understand the hidden meaning in Shang Junlin's words. Shen Yu tilted his head. Those people are sneaky. It's obvious that they have ulterior motives. If your Majesty was the one who found them, your Majesty would definitely know that they have ulterior motives. Shang Junlin looked at Shen Yu meaningfully. There was a slight smile in his eyes. Your Majesty is right. Your Majesty, did you catch the mastermind of the prison break? Shen Yu was interested when he mentioned this matter. The result of the prison break was announced to the public that the mastermind of the prison break was someone from the Zhang family. The entire Zhang family was convicted. Some were beheaded, and some were exiled. With the fall of the Zhang family, the case of Censor Zhang also came to an end. But Shen Yu was well aware that the person who broke into the prison was He Gongzi, not Censor Zhang. The mastermind behind the scenes was naturally not someone from the Zhang family. It was very likely that it was Prince Yu. He just didn't know if Shang Junlin found out that it was Prince Yu. Your Majesty is so smart. Why don't you guess who wanted to break into the prison? His Majesty didn't even give me a hint. How could I guess? Shen Yu complained. Does your Highness know the identity of the person being kidnapped? Shang Junlin asked. I don't know. Shen Yu shook his head. Even if he knew, he couldn't admit it at this time. That man is called He Jinyuan. Shang Junlin stared at Shen Yu's face as he spoke, not missing any change in his expression. He always felt that this matter was too coincidental. It was so coincidental that it didn't seem like a coincidence at all. He didn't know what role Shen Yu played in this matter. Looking at the young man's clear eyes, Shang Junlin hoped that he really had nothing to do with the prison break. Shen Yu allowed Shang Junlin to look at him. His expression did not change at all. He knew about young Master He because of his previous life, so he was not afraid that Shang Junlin would investigate him. No matter how powerful the hidden dragon guards were, they would not be able to find out anything that had not happened. He Jinyuan. Does he have anything to do with the He family? Shin Yu frowned slightly. That's right. Shang Junlin did not notice anything unusual about Shin Yu. He looked away and nodded. He is the most capable person in the younger generation of the He family. He is also the one who the He family has high hopes for. He is the one who can lead the He family back to the top. Although the He family is in a declining state now, it was still in its golden age a few decades ago. In Dahuan, it could do whatever it wanted. If it wasn't for the fact that the late emperor didn't like the daughter of the He family and hated the He family because of her, the He family might still be in the imperial court now. A centipede dies but never falls down. Although the He family has declined for a few decades, its foundation is still there. The remaining power is enough for people to take risks. Under the candlelight, half of the man's face was hidden in the shadows. Shin Yu picked up the brush on the brush holder and spun it. The person who broke the prison was not from the He family. The He family is not that capable. Shang Junlin smiled and took the brush from Shin Yu's hand. If the He family had a capable person, they would not put all their hopes on He Jinyuan. Shang Junlin secretly imprisoned the young master of the He family partly because he wanted to fish out the hidden power of the He family. He did not expect the other party to be so calm and not take any action. Your Majesty, tell me quickly. Don't keep me in suspense. Shin Yu held his chin and urged. Do you think I am a storyteller? Shang Junlin was not angry. It is all thanks to your reminder. I sent people to investigate the vassals and found a lot of interesting things. So your Majesty allowed the vassals to return to the capital early. Shin Yu suddenly understood. No wonder the development of this life was different from the previous one. In the previous life, Shang Junlin might not even know that the young master of the He family was rescued by the King of Yu. Shang Junlin did not deny it. Shin Yu thought, get the person in front of you and find a way to provoke him. He will more or less reveal his flaws. The day of the birthday banquet was approaching. The palace was getting busier and busier. The palace had arranged everything in advance. The banquet of the previous dynasty was mainly handled by the Ministry of Rites. Shin Yu went through the process and was busy with the palace banquet. The people around Shin Yu were so busy that their feet did not touch the ground. Shin Yu himself was not as idle as before. Several times when Imperial Physician Gu came to check his pulse, he was busy. You still have to take care of yourself. Imperial Physician Gu's expression became serious after checking the pulse. Imperial Physician Gu, is the young master's condition getting worse? Mu Shi was scared and her face turned pale. A damaged body can't be healed overnight. You should pay more attention to it. Otherwise, it will be more difficult for you to survive the winter. Imperial Physician Gu hinted. With the medicine prescribed by Imperial Physician Gu, this winter is much easier than before. Shin Yu was telling the truth. His illness was caused by his mother's womb. He was especially afraid of the cold. It was fine when the weather was warm. However, when the weather was cold, Shin Yu's days were particularly difficult. It was as if he was wrapped in ice, from his soul to his body. The coldness was like gangrene attached to the bone. It followed him like a shadow. No matter how warm the room was, it was useless. Shin Yu had lived 2 lives and suffered from the cold in both of them. Only this winter was not as difficult as before. I have already read the ancient books. I will definitely find a way to cure you. Not long after, Shang Junlin found out about the news from Shin Yu's side. With a wave of his hand, he sent a few more experienced palace servants over to help. Eunuch Meng personally brought them over. His Majesty specially instructed that you should not be too tired. If you need anything, just instruct the servants to do it. His Majesty asked me to bring them here. You can use them as you wish. Shin Yu looked at them one by one. These newly sent people had all served in the palace for some time. They were mature and steady, and their ranks were not low. If one were to take them out, they would be more than qualified to be the steward of a palace. Shin Yu felt that Shang Junlin had probably packed up everyone who could be used and sent them over. He had to admit that these people were very capable. With their help, Shin Yu's work was greatly reduced. It was not until a few days later that Shin Yu found out that Imperial Physician Gu had specially gone to Shang Junlin for his condition. Shin Yu rested his chin on his hand and looked at the man who was reading the reports. He asked, "So, His Majesty sent so many people here because of Imperial Physician Gu's instructions?" Shang Junlin's hands paused. His Majesty sent people here first before Imperial Physician Gu went to find His Majesty, Eunuch Meng said with a smile. Normally, he would not dare to speak so casually. But now, he knew that the Emperor treated Shen Guijun very differently. It would not be a problem to speak well of His Majesty in front of Shen Guijun. As expected, Shang Junlin only glanced at Eunuch Meng and spat out 2 words, "You speak too much." "I spoke too much." Eunuch Meng bowed his head and admitted his mistake. He did not feel much fear. "What did you say about Eunuch Meng?" "If Eunuch Meng did not mention it, I would not know that His Majesty cares so much about me." "Is there a problem with me caring about you?" Shang Junlin's expression was magnanimous. "No problem." Shen Yu originally wanted to tease him. Seeing that he did not take the bait, he did not continue, "His Majesty should also care more about me in the future. If you can always be as obedient as you are now, I will naturally always care about you." Hearing Shang Junlin's words, Eunuch Meng's mouth could not help but twitch. If Shen Guijun was obedient, then there was no one in the world who was not obedient. Shang Junlin's birthday came in the blink of an eye. Early in the morning, Shen Yu was dug out of the quilt by Shang Junlin, who had not yet left. Shen Yu rubbed his eyes, "Your Majesty. Didn't I tell you yesterday that you had to get up early today?" Shang Junlin ignored Shen Yu's struggle and wrapped him up with clothes. Shen Yu muttered, "Isn't it because Your Majesty is too energetic and can cause too much trouble? Mushi, come and help your young master wash up." Without waiting for Shen Yu to say anything more, Shang Junlin interrupted him. Last night, it was Shen Yu who pulled him aside and talked about the national conditions of Dahuan for half the night. However, when it came from Shen Yu's mouth, it seemed like something had happened. Looking at the servants around them, they all lowered their heads and could not hide their shyness. Eunuch Meng also had an expression that said, "I understand. Your Majesty has worked hard." Shang Junlin opened his mouth and then closed it again. This kind of situation had happened more than once, and he could not explain it every time. Shang Junlin had already tidied himself up and stood aside to wait for Shen Yu to wash up. After washing his face, Shen Yu was finally completely awake. He looked around and saw that the servants around him glanced at him from time to time with obvious joy on their faces. Especially Eunuch Meng and Mu Shi, they were gratified but also distressed. Shen Yu touched his nose inexplicably. He walked to Shang Junlin's side, pulled on his sleeve, and asked in a low voice, "What's wrong with them?" Shang Junlin looked back. Under his gaze, the servants all lowered their heads and did not dare to show the slightest expression. "Don't you remember what you said?" Shang Junlin lowered his head and looked at him. Shen Yu carefully thought back and suddenly remembered what he said in front of the servants when he was unconscious. He lowered his head little by little. "Does Your Majesty have nothing to say to me?" "I spoke carelessly. Your Majesty is a magnanimous person. Don't fuss over such a small matter with me." Shen Yu's voice became lower and lower. If your majesty cares, I'll go and say it. I'm too good at tormenting people, no need. Shang Junlin rubbed between his eyebrows. Go and change your clothes. Shang Junlin had a premonition that if Xinyu explained, the servants' imaginations would run in an even more ridiculous direction. Xinyu looked at him again. Seeing that he did not seem angry, he went behind the screen to change his clothes. Eunuch Meng walked slowly to Shang Junlin and lowered his voice to persuade him, Your Majesty's health is not good. Imperial physician Gu also said that you need to restrain yourself when it comes to that matter. Moreover, you have to be busy today. You should be considerate of Your Majesty's health. Genius 1 second. Remember this website, www.biku50. CC Literature Mobile Version Website, Biku50. CC. Chapter 21. Meng Chang, are you very free? Shang Junlin narrowed his eyes. I still have a lot of things to do. I'll go now. Eunuch Meng could understand. His Majesty was young and strong, and Shen Guijun was the only one in the harem. Shen Guijun couldn't bear all his energy. It was just that Shen Guijun had to suffer. Fortunately, Imperial physician Gu's medical skills were excellent, so he didn't have to worry too much about Shen Guijun's health. Shen Yu changed his clothes and came out. Eunuch Meng was no longer in the room. He looked around the room but didn't see him. What are you looking for? Shang Junlin walked over and adjusted Shen Yu's hairpin. Shen Yu hadn't reached the age of 20 yet, so he usually didn't tie up his hair. Shen Yu himself didn't like to dress up too much, so he usually tied his hair up with a hair tie. Today, Shen Yu had his hair tied up, which was rare. With a jade hairpin inlaid with rubies, he looked more noble than usual. His whole person was shining brightly. Where's Eunuch Meng? Isn't he always by your side serving you? Shen Yu was wearing the clothes that represented his status as a noble. There was dignity in the luxurious clothes, so dazzling that people couldn't take their eyes off him. Shang Junlin quietly looked at him for a while before saying, I have something to tell him to do. Oh. Shen Yu didn't ask any more questions. Other than the day he entered the palace, this was the first time Shen Yu wore such complicated clothes. He straightened his sleeves. The clothes looked good, but it limited his movements. Your Majesty, do I look good today? Shen Yu approached Shang Junlin. His voice was as soft as water. Shang Junlin looked at that incomparably beautiful face and found it hard to say the words, not good. Shen Yu waited for a long time, but Shang Junlin didn't answer. He deliberately made a sad expression, sure enough, I don't look good. I'm so ugly that Your Majesty can't say anything. Not ugly, Guijun is very beautiful today. Not only today, but in Shang Junlin's eyes, Shen Yu was always so beautiful that it tugged at his heartstrings. Thinking that such a beautiful noble would soon be seen by the courtiers, Shang Junlin frowned slightly. He suddenly had the idea of placing Shen Yu in the harem and not letting anyone see her. Shang Junlin shook off the strange thought that suddenly popped up in his mind and said, You may leave when you're done. Shen Yu didn't know what Shang Junlin was thinking. He smiled and approached him, sighing in a low voice, Your Majesty is also very beautiful today. Only you would dare to describe us like this. Looking at Shu Li's face that was so close to him, Shang Junlin curled his fingers. Shen Yu, I'm just telling the truth. Your Majesty won't punish me for telling the truth, right? Shang Junlin, we see that you're very brave. Are you still afraid of being punished? This is Your Majesty's misconception. I'm very timid, just a little bit. Shen Yu stretched out his hand and used his thumb and index finger to make a small distance. Also, I'm most afraid of pain. Your Majesty, please don't let me feel pain in the future. This will depend on Guizhun's performance. Shang Junlin looked at him meaningfully. Shen Yu pretended not to understand the meaning behind Shang Junlin's words and asked doubtfully, my performance is not good enough? Then your majesty, tell me, do you like someone who is coquettish, clingy, or cold? Shang Junlin couldn't help but imagine Shen Yu with different styles. His heart suddenly jumped and he interrupted Shen Yu, we like Guizhun's type. What a coincidence, I also like my type. Shen Yu stopped talking about the previous topic. Seeing Shang Junlin's face change slightly, he added, of course, I like your majesty the most. Shang Junlin's eyebrows softened at a speed visible to the naked eye. Eunuch Meng, who had finished his work, came back and heard this conversation. He couldn't help but shake his head. The relationship between His Majesty and Guizhun was really deep. In the gorgeous hall, the courtiers and vassals had already taken their seats. The well-trained palace servants nimbly served plates of delicacies. There were 2 empty seats in the high seats. One was for the emperor, and the other was a little lower. It was prepared for Shen Yu. His Majesty hadn't arrived yet, so the people present were relatively relaxed. They gathered together and whispered. The content of the conversation was nothing more than the politics of the court, the relationship between the major families, and so on. What was different from the past was that today they had one more topic to talk about, and that was Shen Guizhun. His Majesty really dotes on this Shen Guizhun. Yes, now Yuzhang Palace is the most powerful family in the harem. It is said that not long ago, Shen Guizhun, because of jealousy, captured several concubines left by the former emperor and tortured them in Yuzhang Palace. Is this true? His Majesty didn't do anything about it. When it happened, His Majesty was also there. That person was also bold. Under the pretext of playing hide and seek, she directly bumped into His Majesty's arms. Shen Guizhun got angry on the spot and crippled the woman's hand that touched His Majesty. Be careful with your words. The person who spoke casually glanced in a certain direction and lowered his voice, I'm just telling you. It is said that Shen Guizhun was very angry that night. His Majesty had to coax her for a long time to calm her down. This is impossible, right? Some people refuse to believe it, it's just a man. If His Majesty wants, he can have as many men as he wants. But His Majesty only likes Shen Guizhun. At this time, a low-ranking official came over and whispered, what about the former emperor's concubines who were taken away by Shen Guizhun? Of course, they are still locked up in Yuzhang Palace. If Shen Guizhun's anger doesn't subside, she probably won't let them go. His Majesty is too. Some people couldn't stand it, in any case, they are the former emperor's people. Some people stood on Shen Yu's side. If they didn't have the idea first and were caught red-handed, Shen Guizhun wouldn't be angry with them. The people who were talking about it didn't notice that not far from them, the man quietly crushed the cup in his hand. Your Majesty, Shen Guizhun has arrived. The hall suddenly quieted down. Shang Junlin took Shen Yu to the high seat, and the ministers saluted. For many people, this was the first time they saw Shen Yu's appearance. At the moment when they saw her, some people found a reason for Shang Junlin's abnormal behavior. Such a beauty, if it were them, they would also be willing to treat her like a treasure. Shen Yu's beauty was flamboyant and gorgeous, like a flower in full bloom, which could be seen but not touched. Everyone, please rise. Shang Junlin held Shen Yu's hand, walked all the way to the place where Shen Yu should sit, and came to the highest place. Shen Yu raised her eyebrows in surprise, poked the man's arm, and asked in a low voice, Your Majesty. The ministers who got up also saw this scene, and they looked at each other and frowned. Sitting with me, are you afraid? Shang Junlin looked down at the young man beside him, and his eyes were obscure. Reason told him that he should let Shin Yu sit in the place where he should sit, but when he passed by that place, he didn't let go, but led the young man to the highest place. I'm not afraid. Shin Yu tugged at the man's clothes, as long as your majesty doesn't mind me taking up space. Shang Junlin hooked up the corner of his mouth, and a faint smile appeared in his eyes. Seeing that Shin Yu was going to sit next to Shang Junlin, some ministers couldn't sit still. Your Majesty, this is inappropriate. Oh. Then tell me, what's inappropriate about it? The smile in his eyes instantly disappeared, and the young emperor looked down at the minister who spoke. His expression was indiscernible. Obviously, it was just a very calm sentence, but the minister who was kneeling on the ground was frightened and sweated. He knew that he had angered his majesty, but some rules must not be abolished. Gritting his teeth, he made up his mind and said, Your Majesty, it's inappropriate for Guijun to sit next to your majesty. Once the first sentence came out, the rest of the words were easy to say. Since ancient times, only the empress, as the head of the harem, can stand next to your majesty. No matter how much your majesty favors Guijun, he is not the empress, he can't. Feeling more and more oppressive, he gritted his teeth and said the last sentence, he can't have the same treatment as the empress. Shang Junlin's black eyes sank, ignoring the minister's words, and sat down with Shin Yu. Your Majesty. According to Kong Daren's opinion, should I confer Guijun as the empress today? Shang Junlin stroked Shin Yu's wrist and said with a cold tone. Kong Daren never thought that the emperor would rather confer Shin Yu as the empress than let Shin Yu return to where he should be. The ministers and vassals who were watching were also surprised. For the first time, they felt that the rumor about how much the emperor doted on Shin Guijun was not a rumor. No one dared to stand up when the emperor was angry. If it was something else, they could argue. But this was related to Shin Guijun. Who knows if the emperor would directly confer her as the empress if they stood up. Seeing that no one spoke for him, Kong Daren pointed his spear at Shin Yu. Guijun, since you have entered the palace, you should scrupulously abide by your duty, be magnanimous and virtuous, and persuade His Majesty to have more children. Feeling that Shang Junlin's cold aura was getting stronger and stronger, Shin Yu knew that Kong Daren had really angered Shang Junlin this time. Shin Yu pressed the back of Shang Junlin's hand and signaled him not to speak. He stood up from Shang Junlin's arms and looked at Kong Daren condescendingly. Does Kong Daren live by the sea? Why do you care so much? Shin Yu slightly lowered his eyes and said with a somewhat careless tone. Kong Daren's face turned red. You, Kong Daren, did you make a mistake? Shin Yu was too lazy to listen to his words and interrupted, this world is His Majesty's world. Kong Daren, as the imperial censor, it is your duty to persuade His Majesty, but it depends on what you are persuading. I also want to ask Kong Daren, where I sit, does it have anything to do with the state affairs? Kong Daren couldn't answer. Of course, he knew that it didn't matter. He was just using this as a pretext to make a fuss. As for the issue of having children, you should all know my attitude. I can't tolerate sand in my eyes and I am also very domineering. Since His Majesty has me, he can't have anyone else, you are simply unreasonable. Seeing that Shin Yu was stubborn, the man turned to Duke Bei and said, Duke Bei, is this the good son you taught? One Duke Bei, who had already experienced Shin Yu's power, didn't want to talk to him at all. Your Majesty, Shin Guijun has only been in the palace for a few days, but he is already so lawless. You can't let him do everything. In the future, maybe. Shin Yu narrowed his eyes and looked at the middle-aged man who was panting heavily. This man was Shang Junlin's uncle. Because he had contributed a little to Shang Junlin's ascension to the throne, he had always boasted that he had contributed to the ascension of the emperor and was the most capable person in the royal family. If Shin Yu remembered correctly, this man had an unmarried niece who was a popular candidate to be the empress. No wonder he couldn't sit still after hearing Shang Junlin's words. Princely, be careful with your words. Shang Junlin lightly interrupted Princely. He stood up and put one arm around Shen Yu's waist. His black eyes looked down emotionlessly. Guijun is my man. How I pamper him is my business. It has nothing to do with you. Do you understand? Shen Yu leaned into the man's arms, the corners of her mouth slightly raised, but the words she said sent chills down one's spine. Genius. 1 second. Remember this website, www.biku50. CC Literature Mobile Version Reading Website, Biku50. CC. Chapter 22. Too arrogant. That was everyone's first thought. No one expected that Shen Yu would say such a thing in public. If he said it to the emperor in private, it could barely be considered a joke. But now, no one dared to treat Shen Yu's words as a joke. Guijun is joking. His Majesty is the emperor of a country. How can there only be one man in the harem? The speaker deliberately emphasized the word man. He was reminding Shen Yu that he was just a man and couldn't bear the glory of monopolizing the emperor's favor. Darren, no matter how much you say, you can't ignore His Majesty's wishes, right? In the end, this is His Majesty's private matter. His Majesty can do whatever he wants. If I said that you should dismiss all your wives and concubines at home and give you a few that you don't like, you wouldn't be happy, right? You are twisting words and forcing logic. His Majesty is the emperor of a country. How can he be compared to us? The emperor of a country is a person. You are also a person. If you don't want to give people to you, how can His Majesty be happy? Shen Yu nestled in Shang Junlin's arms and felt the man's chest tremble. Her hand was also held by the man. Guijun is right. My private matter doesn't need to trouble my beloved ministers. Everyone could hear the joy in Shang Junlin's words. A crisis had been resolved. It was reasonable to say that the ministers should be happy. But the development of the situation didn't make them happy. The emperor favored only one person. For them, it wasn't a good thing. Some people began to secretly regret. If they had known that His Majesty wasn't tempted, they wouldn't have encouraged the son of Jinbei Ho to enter the palace. Or, they should have recommended their children to enter the palace from the beginning. Compared to the endless glory and wealth, what was a little bit of danger? After that, during the palace banquet, no one dared to say anything about Shen Yu. The emperor's attitude was very clear. If they continued to talk about this matter, they didn't know how to appreciate favors. After a short period of low pressure, the palace banquet became lively again. Graceful dancers walked over with graceful steps, dancing gracefully to the moving music. Their gauze fluttered with their movements, creating an extreme visual feast. The dancers raised in the palace are indeed different. Shen Yu poked the meat in the bowl and sighed. You like it? Shang Junlin asked in an ambiguous tone. Shen Yu was keenly aware of Shang Junlin's displeasure. Although he did not know the reason, he still answered cautiously, that's not true. Compared to them, I still prefer Your Majesty. Shang Junlin was in a better mood and returned the favor, I also like you more. Seeing that the human pressure around him had returned to normal, Shen Yu continued to enjoy the song and dance. He had a lot of patience for beautiful things. While watching, he asked Shang Junlin, Your Majesty, do you know who arranged this dance? Shang Junlin did not care about these things. He summoned eunuch Meng and said, Answer your question. It was arranged by the music department. If you like it, I can ask them to arrange more. Eunuch Meng assisted Shang Junlin in managing the palace, so he was very clear about these trivial matters. Meng Chang. Hearing Shang Junlin's emotionless voice, eunuch Meng knew that things were not good. He was so focused on pleasing the emperor that he forgot that His Majesty would be jealous because of this. Shen Yu acted as if he did not feel anything. He tugged at Shang Junlin's sleeve and asked softly, "Your Majesty, can you accompany me to watch it?" Shang Junlin's displeasure disappeared instantly. He glanced at Eunuch Meng and said, "Didn't you hear what the emperor said?" "Yes, I will arrange it." Eunuch Meng sighed in his heart. The emperor was still able to deal with His Majesty. "Your Majesty is busy with official business. You should relax more." Shen Yu finished speaking and was about to eat the meat in the bowl when he was stopped by the man. "Your Majesty, it's not good for your body to be cold." Shang Junlin turned his head and ordered the palace servant, "Go and change the hot food for the emperor." The palace servant obeyed and left. Shen Yu was stunned and then smiled. His eyes seemed to be full of stars. "Your Majesty is so nice." Shang Junlin was stared at by the young man's starry eyes. He could not help but lower his head and sigh, "Your Majesty's eyes are so beautiful. Even the most expensive gemstone could not compare to the brilliance of those eyes." Those who stared at them could not help but be immersed in them and give up escaping. Shang Junlin's aggressive aura was too strong. Shen Yu blinked and uncomfortably moved to the side. He felt that Shang Junlin's eyes were not the same as before. Fortunately, at this time, the palace servant brought the dishes. Shang Junlin withdrew his gaze and the atmosphere that made Shen Yu uncomfortable disappeared. The palace servant changed the dishes on the table one by one. Shang Junlin was silent for a while and said, "Eat it while it's hot." Under the tempting aroma, Shen Yu did not have time to think about Shang Junlin's strange behavior just now. He tasted a few dishes and put the dishes that he liked into Shang Junlin's bowl. "Your Majesty, eat with me." The interaction between the two was clearly seen by the ministers below. But they had just suffered a loss under Shen Yu's hands. They did not want to ask for trouble again. They could only pretend that they did not see anything. The Prince of Yu sat in the front position of the vassal king's table. His position was not far from where Shang Junlin and Shen Yu were sitting. He could vaguely hear the voices from above. Hearing Shen Yu's soft voice talking to Shang Junlin, the Prince of Yu silently clenched the cup. When he first approached Shen Yu's attitude had always been very cold. She did not treat him any differently from others. But now, she smiled sweetly in front of Shang Junlin. Her every move was so dazzling that people could not take their eyes off her. So, was he really just a substitute that Shen Yu used to comfort her when she was bored? If it were not for the fact that conditions did not allow him to do so, he really wanted to ask her in person. In what way was he inferior to Shang Junlin? Why was he the substitute of the most annoying person? Unfortunately, since that meeting, he had never found a chance to see Shen Yu again. He used the previous method to send Shen Yu letters and asked people to send things to Shen Yu. Except for the things that were returned intact, the letters that he sent were like a stone that sank into the sea. There was no reply at all. Later on, he encountered all kinds of troubles. He could not even take care of himself, let alone find a chance to see Shen Yu, who had already entered the palace. He wanted to let the spies in the palace pass a message to Shen Yu, but Shang Junlin watched him too closely. Yuzhang Palace was heavily guarded. Once his people appeared, they would be arrested. Before his great cause was accomplished, he absolutely could not expose himself at this time. Why does the Prince of Yu seem to be in a bad mood? Prince Li finished a cup of wine and noticed the ugly expression on the Prince of Yu's face. He followed his line of sight and rolled his eyes. Isn't Prince Li the same? The Prince of Yu's attitude towards Prince Li, who had already sided with Shang Junlin, was not very good. This prince is in a bad mood because my calculations have failed. What about Prince Yu? Prince Li did not mind exposing his scars. As far as this prince knows, Your Highness Prince Yu does not have much of a grudge with the two above. You don't need to worry about this prince's matters. The Prince of Yu took a sip of wine. Under the influence of alcohol, his attitude became even worse. Prince Lik should worry more about himself. Because of your own calculations, you have angered Shen Guijun, who is favored by the emperor. Don't lose the emperor's heart because of this. Shen Guijun. Prince Li's voice was heavy. If I had known that he was such a powerful character, would not have let him enter the palace in the first place. Didn't our good emperor personally choose him to enter the palace? The Prince of Yu keenly sensed something and deliberately asked. Does he really think that he was chosen by the heavens? If no one did anything behind his back, the one entering the palace could have been Madame Zhang. Madame Wang did not have to be Madame Qin. Prince Li explained meaningfully. The Prince of Yu's eyes darkened. As expected. Originally, I only wanted to find a pathfinder. Who would have thought that he would become a roadblock? The Prince of Yu poured himself a cup of wine. The affairs of the world are truly unpredictable. Did you not investigate what kind of person you were sending into the palace before deciding on the candidate? The Prince of Yu couldn't help but ask. What's the use of saying this now? The Prince of Yu raised his wine cup and clinked it with the Prince of Yu's. What we need to consider now is how to remove this roadblock. Aren't you just shooting yourself in the foot by doing this? The Prince of Yu's tone became even more unfriendly when he thought of Xin Yu and the fact that he had been used as a substitute. Why does Your Highness Prince of Yu have to poke at this prince? The one who angered you is not this prince. Every injustice has its perpetrator and every debt has its debtor. The Prince of Yu drained the wine in his cup in one gulp and slowly revealed his true motive. Your Highness Prince of Yu, why don't you come to Huatang residence for a chat after the palace banquet? The Prince of Yu gripped the cup in his hand tightly. After a moment of silence, he said, okay. The Prince of Yu returned to his seat in satisfaction. The two of them sat close to each other, so their short exchange did not attract much attention. Shen Yu had been paying a portion of his attention to the Prince of Yu, so he had a panoramic view of the Prince of Yu and Prince Li's actions. He absent-mindedly withdrew his gaze and poured himself a cup of wine. Before he could put it into his mouth, the hand holding the cup was held by Shang Junlin. Your Majesty. Shen Yu was at a loss. Imperial physician Gu said that it's best if you don't touch wine. His large palm wrapped around Shen Yu's fingers. Shang Junlin leaned forward slightly and drank the wine in his cup in one gulp. That's my cup, Shen Yu said quietly. Genius 1 second. Remember this website, www.biku50. CC Literature Mobile Version Reading Website, biku50. CC. Chapter 23. Your Majesty is my husband. How could I dislike Your Majesty? As long as Your Majesty doesn't dislike me, it's fine. Shen Yu looked away and lowered his voice. Surrounded by musical instruments, Shen Yu's voice entered Shang Junlin's ears without being affected. You must be joking. Husband and wife are one. I dislike anyone but you. Shang Junlin slightly curved his lips. The man's hand was big and warm. Shen Yu's hand was completely wrapped in his palm. Shen Yu could feel a steady stream of heat coming from their skin. The palm of his hand was cold, and the back of his hand was hot. A strange feeling spread from his hand to the bottom of his heart. Shen Yu's fingers moved. He wanted Shang Junlin to let go of him. Unexpectedly, not only did the man not let go, but he also increased the strength of his grip. Your Majesty, you should let go of my hand. After maintaining the original position for a while, Shen Yu saw that Shang Junlin still had no intention of letting go, so he had to remind him. Shang Junlin seemed to have woken up from a dream and let go of his hand. Shin Yu immediately took his hand back. His palm was empty, and his heart also seemed to be empty. Shin Yu still felt the man's warmth on the back of his hand. He retracted his hand into his wide sleeves and unconsciously curled his fingers. Shin Yu didn't have a big appetite. After eating a little, he felt full. He stared at the jade-colored wine pot on the small table and licked his lips. The wine was brewed in the palace for a long time. It was mellow and fragrant. The fragrance of the wine seemed to have a long hook, hooking Shin Yu's sense of smell. People were always like this. The more they were not allowed to touch something, the more they wanted to touch it. Shin Yu was obsessed with wine in his previous life. It was not because he drank too much, but because the cold illness in his body could only be alleviated after drinking. It would not make him feel like he was living in an ice cellar. In this life, his physical condition was not as bad as it was in his previous life, and Shang Junlin had instructed him not to let wine appear in his sight, so he did not miss it. But today, the aroma of the wine had suddenly aroused his appetite, and he wanted to taste it even more. "Your Majesty," Shin Yu pulled the man's sleeve and said, "Let me have a taste. I promise I'll only take a sip." "How come we didn't know that your highness was such a glutton?" Shang Junlin raised his eyebrows and looked at the young man. He remembered that according to the news from the hidden dragon guards, Shin Yu did not drink at all. "I just want to have a taste." "Who asked this wine to be so fragrant?" Shin Yu perfectly explained what it meant to be strong even though he was not in the right. "You are clearly the one who is greedy, yet you are blaming the wine." Shang Junlin shook his head with a smile. "It is not that Jin does not allow you to drink, but Imperial Physician Du said that your body is not suitable for drinking. I drank when I first entered the palace." Under Shang Junlin's deep gaze, Shin Yu's voice became lower and lower. "Why did you stop talking? It seems that your highness did not forget what happened that night." Shin Yu indeed remembered. That day was the first time he had a relapse after his rebirth. He always thought that it was a coincidence, but it turned out that there was another reason. "Was my relapse because I drank wine?" Shin Yu hesitated. "Yes and no. The wine was just a trigger." Shang Junlin was unwilling to elaborate, and Shin Yu did not want to force him. He could only reluctantly look away and continue to focus on the singing and dancing. Other than the unhappiness at the beginning, the overall atmosphere of the banquet was very good. It was just that some segments were very boring. Towards the end, Shin Yu was a little tired. "Your Majesty, I want to go out for a walk." Shang Junlin knew that he was bored and did not stop him. "Go, don't stay outside for too long." In order to not attract attention, Shin Yu only took Mu Shi with him when he left. The palace banquet was getting lively. Other than a few people who had been paying attention to Shin Yu, the others did not notice that Shin Yu had quietly left. King Yu was one of them. Seeing this, he found an excuse and followed him out. Seeing this, Prince Li stroked his beard with a smile in his eyes. He knew that something must have happened between King Yu and Shen Guijun. Otherwise, why would Shen Guijun look at him with such a betrayed expression? He waved his hand to summon a servant and ordered in a low voice, "Follow King Yu and report everything to me. Be careful, don't be discovered." "Yes." The servant accepted the order and left. The young emperor who was sitting on the high seat saw this scene and his eyes darkened. He knocked on the table with his knuckles and ordered, "Meng Chang, let the hidden dragon guards follow his highness." Eunuch Meng was surprised. Seeing His Majesty's cold expression, he swallowed his questions and said, "Yes." Shin Yu did not know that King Yu had followed him out and that King Li's men were following him. He did not go far and found a place to hide from the wind. "Mu Shi, what else happened on the day I fainted?" "This." Mu Shi's expression changed slightly. "Young master, I'm not sure." Eunuch Meng handled everything that happened that day. I only know that young master, because, Mu Shi could not continue. Because of what? Shang Junlin did not mention what happened that day. Shen Yu thought that he had only fainted, but now it seemed that this was not the case. Because he was thinking about something, Shen Yu did not notice Mu Shi's strange expression. Because young master could not stand your majesty and fainted. After saying it in one breath, Mu Shi's face turned red. Cough, cough, cough. Hearing this reason, Shen Yu choked on his own saliva. Is young master okay? Mu Shi did not have time to blush. She quickly stepped forward. Her Majesty knows that young master's health is not good, but she still went overboard. Stop. Shen Yu felt that if he did not interrupt, Mu Shi would say many more surprising things. What else? Think carefully. What other unusual things happened? If you want to talk about unusual things, does Her Majesty change most of the servants in Yuzhang Palace the next day count? Mu Shi could only think of this. Most of the palace servants were changed. It seemed that something did happen that night that he did not know, but he did not know if it had anything to do with his sudden illness. It's normal that young master does not remember. Most of the people in that group have never shown their faces in front of young master. I only found out later, Mu Shi explained. No wonder I didn't find anything wrong, Shen Yu muttered. In fact, I think that Her Majesty is very good to young master except that she doesn't know how to restrain herself. Mu Shi clearly saw how Shang Junlin treated Shen Yu. Even if she was biased against Shang Junlin at the beginning, she had to admit that Shang Junlin was the person who treated her young master the best. Her Majesty is indeed. Shen Yu suddenly turned his head. Who? One Prince Yu walked out of the dark with a dark face, holding a withered branch in his hand. It was the sound of breaking the branch that made Shen Yu find him. Your Highness. Mu Shi took a step back and saluted. Why did Your Highness come out? Shen Yu looked at Prince Yu as if he was a stranger, which made Prince Yu extremely angry. Especially after hearing the conversation between the two, the anger in his heart had long been surging. He was clearly the one who met Shen Yu first, and he was the one who discovered Shen Yu, this pearl. So why didn't he get anything, and even let the person he hated the most take advantage of him? At that time, when he caught a glimpse of her in the corridor, her jade-like face was deeply imprinted in his heart. If he didn't have a very good impression of her from the beginning, why would he, a dignified prince, lower himself to make friends with her personally? When he quietly followed her out, Prince Yu himself didn't know what he was thinking. He used a disguised identity to make friends with Shen Yu. Now he was Prince Yu, and Shen Yu didn't know him at all. He couldn't do anything even if he followed her out. It was undeniable that Prince Yu had a trace of expectation in his heart that he was unwilling to admit. He hoped that Shen Yu could recognize him, but he was also afraid that Shen Yu could recognize him. With unclear thoughts, he followed them all the way until he heard the conversation between Shen Yu and Mu Shi. He could no longer keep calm. The person he had never touched before was not only taken by someone else, but also injured by that person's impetuousness. For a moment, Prince Yu didn't even understand whether he was angry that Shen Yu, who he regarded as his possession, was touched by someone else or that Shen Yu was injured by that person. In anger, he broke the dead branch beside him. After being discovered by Shen Yu, he didn't intend to continue hiding and directly walked out. Shen Guijun is really in a good mood. Prince Yu stared at Shen Yu's face and saw the indifference on his face. The anger in his heart burned more and more. Why? Why can Shen Yu live with Shang Junlin with a clear conscience as if nothing happened? Why is he the only one who remembers that relationship? Shen Yu didn't feel Prince Yu's anger, but so what? He abandoned the trash in his previous life. Did he have to pick it up again in this life? He didn't have this hobby. Those who make him unhappy, he will definitely return it 1,000 times. Shin Yu, you are really good. Prince Yu took a few steps forward, but Mu Shi stopped in front of Shin Yu and said sternly, "This is the Imperial Palace. Your Royal Highness, please respect yourself." Shin Yu put one hand on Mu Shi's arm and pushed her away. "We don't know each other." "Why do you say that?" "Don't know each other." Prince Yu's face was gloomy. "Shin Yu, young Master Shin, do we really not know each other?" "Prince Yu is joking." Shin Yu shook his head lightly. "Among the people I know, there is no Prince Yu." "What about Xiao Yu?" Prince Yu stared at Shin Yu's face, trying to see a trace of panic on his face. Unfortunately, Prince Yu was destined to be disappointed. Hearing this name, Shin Yu's face didn't change. "I knew him before I entered the Imperial Palace." "Why?" "Just know each other." Prince Yu's eyes were gloomy. "Guijun, tell me, if I tell His Majesty that you have privately promised to marry someone before you entered the Imperial Palace, will he still dote on you like he does now?" "Prince Yu seems to be very concerned about my affairs." "Is it because you also like me?" Shin Yu stopped Mu Shi, who wanted to speak, and asked casually. Prince Yu's chest was filled with depression. Although he didn't want to admit it, to some extent, Shin Yu did say what he was thinking. Genius 1 second. Remember this website, www.biku50. CC Literature Mobile Version Reading URL, biku50. CC. Chapter 24. How could King Yu, who had just been provoked by this matter, hear these words? The veins on his forehead bulged, and he almost used up all his patience to prevent himself from losing his composure. "You weren't like this before." King Yu was so angry that he lost all reason. He blurted out his thoughts. "Are you still blaming this king for not protecting you and causing you to enter the palace?" "Wait." Shin Yu interrupted King Yu's words. He thought, King Yu's tolerance is not good. With just a few words, he revealed all his secrets. In his previous life, King Yu was not so honest in front of him. It was he who guessed King Yu's true identity through clues. Why did he say it so quickly in this life? Was the impact of him entering the palace so big? All kinds of thoughts flashed through his mind, but he didn't show it on his face. He pretended to be puzzled and asked, "What does King Yu mean? Why don't I remember having contact with King Yu before entering the palace? What does it have to do with His Royal Highness whether I enter the palace or not?" A series of questions were thrown at King Yu. King Yu's mind, which was occupied by anger, finally sobered up. When he realized what he had said, his face turned ugly. This king, or did King Yu conceal his identity and contact me? Let me guess, King Yu mentioned Xiao Yu just now. Is it possible that His Royal Highness is Xiao Yu? Shin Yu stood on the steps with his arms crossed and looked down at the man in the prince's attire. King Yu didn't expect that Shin Yu could guess the truth with just a few words. He flatly denied, "This king is not." "Then is young Master Wang? Young Master Lin? Or young Master Su?" When a name was read out, King Yu's face darkened. He thought that he was a substitute was the limit of his tolerance. He never thought that he might be a substitute, one of the substitutes. Shin Yu pretended to be distressed. "There are a lot of people. How about His Royal Highness? Tell me directly, which one are you?" "Shin Yu, don't go too far." "I'm going too far." "Who eavesdropped on my conversation with the maid? Who was the one who followed me out? Who deliberately concealed his identity and approached me?" "Your Highness Prince Yu, I also want to know what you want to do." Shin Yu's face turned cold. "This prince is only here to remind you. Don't think that just because you have the Emperor's favor, you can do whatever you want in the palace. There are many people eyeing the position of Empress. If you show off like this, you will only become a thorn in their side. They will only want to get rid of you as soon as possible. King Yu took a deep breath and suppressed the anger in his heart. You don't have to worry about that. I believe that His Majesty will protect me. After all, His Majesty is not like some people who say that it has to be you, but in the blink of an eye, they can turn a blind eye to that person's predicament and desperately try to make their presence known. Shen Yu walked down the steps and approached Yu Wang step by step. Yu Wang, are you still blaming me? Are you still blaming me for not finding a way to not enter the palace because of you? This king did not. Yu Wang's tone unconsciously lowered. When he first heard the news, that was indeed what he thought. Shen Yu's words were like a gust of wind that blew away his self-deceiving disguise and revealed his selfishness. Shen Yu stepped back slightly and brushed past Yu Wang without any reluctance. Now I really feel that entering the palace was the best choice I have ever made. No matter what identity you used to approach me, there was no connection between us in the past, and there will be no connection in the future. There was only the hatred of 2 lifetimes apart. After the people who secretly followed Yu Wang returned, they reported everything that happened here to Prince Li in full detail. Prince Li stroked his beard. I didn't expect that our Shangui Jun had such a relationship with Yu Wang. Your Highness, should we, with such a big handle, we must grasp it well. Shen Yu, isn't Shangui Jun very arrogant? This king wants to see if His Majesty can still treat him as before after this incident. Yu Wang smiled in a good mood. He didn't expect to find such a big surprise by secretly following Yu Wang. He was just worrying about how to deal with Shen Yu, and the solution came to him. It seemed that even God was on his side. Send someone to investigate carefully. This king wants to know all the details of what happened to Shen Yu before he entered the palace. On the second day of the palace banquet, several people who were disrespectful to Shen Yu at the palace banquet were dismissed. The ministers who had a premonition about this were used to it. His Majesty was already merciful by only dismissing them and not beheading them. In addition, these people's official positions were not high, and their conduct was not completely impeccable. Their disappearance from the court did not cause much of a stir. It was getting closer to the end of the year. Shang Junlin was not as busy as before, and the time he spent in Yuzhang Palace increased day by day. Because it was almost the new year, Shang Junlin simply ordered the vassal kings to spend the new year in the capital before leaving. Your Highness, do you know why His Majesty did not let us go back? In the private room, Prince Li took a sip of wine. Does Imperial Uncle know? Yu Wang really couldn't figure it out. Recently, he had been in a terrible fix because of Shen Qingran's matter, and really had no time to care about other things. I can guess a little. I'm afraid that some people's hearts are too big, and His Majesty wants to use this opportunity to knock some sense into them. Prince Li looked at Yu Wang meaningfully as he spoke. Yu Wang's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't show it on his face. Your nephew really doesn't know. Recently, your nephew has been busy with some personal matters and has no time to care about other things. Prince Li smiled and didn't expose him, but his next sentence almost made Yu Wang jump out of his seat. Imperial nephew, have you considered how to deal with your relationship with Shangui Jun? Now that His Majesty dotes on Shangui Jun so much, if he knew that you had an ambiguous relationship before Shangui Jun entered the palace, wouldn't it? Prince Li didn't finish his sentence, but Yu Wang knew what he meant. The matter between him and Shen Yu could be big or small. If it was used by someone with ulterior motives, all his years of planning would be ruined. Imperial Uncle must be joking. This prince and Shangui Jun don't know each other. How could we have such a relationship? Yu Wang doesn't need to rush to refute. Since this prince dared to speak, I naturally have evidence. Now, you and I have the same goal. Is Yu Wang willing to watch your former lover be in love with someone else for the rest of your life? Prince Li didn't expect that his subordinate would be able to find out such interesting things. It turned out that Yuang had secretly come to the capital and even concealed his identity to be on good terms with the legitimate son of Count North. Your Highness, why don't you and I work together? What I want is the position of Empress. If you still want Xinyu, after this matter is done, you can bring him back to your fief. Yuang knew that since Prince Li dared to say it directly, he must know something. But some things were different from the person himself admitting it. After a moment of silence, Yuang said, "We can work together, but I hope Imperial Uncle understands that the one who has feelings for Xinyu is Xiao Yu. It has nothing to do with this prince." Prince Li smiled. "This prince understands. Your Highness has always stayed in your fief and never left before the Imperial Edict arrived. A toast to Imperial Uncle." Yuang raised his wine cup and drank it in one gulp. "Imperial Nephew, if you have any problems, feel free to look for this prince. As long as this prince can help, this prince will definitely not refuse." Yuang's hand tightened around the wine cup. Xinyu. He couldn't stand the sight of Xinyu staying by Shang Junlin's side. Whenever he thought of it, it was like a ball of fire was burning in his heart. Achoo! Young master, rest early. It's already very late. Mu Shi brought in hot water. Xinyu put down the pen in his hand and soaked his hand in the hot water. When he felt his body temperature return, he took it out. "I'm fine." "Young master, will Yuang really be fine?" Knowing that Xiao Yu was the Empress of Yu, Mu Shi had been worried. If Yuang spread rumors about what happened back then, would Her Majesty believe her young master? Since ancient times, there were only a few things that men couldn't tolerate the most. Moreover, Her Majesty was the Emperor, so she would only be more intolerable. "Do you think he will be stupid enough to perish together with me?" Mu Shi shook her head. She was just afraid that Yuang would be too angry with her young master and expose the matter directly. Besides, there's nothing between me and him. Even if he wants to do something, he won't be able to do it. Xinyu expected that Yuang would not let it go, but he didn't expect it to be in this way. Looking at the men in front of him, Xinyu stopped in his tracks. What are the two princes doing? Seeing that the weather was good, Xinyu went out of Yuzhang Palace for a walk and planned to send the late birthday gift to Shang Junlin. He didn't expect to run into Yuang and Li Wang. "We came specially to find your Highness. Can we talk in private?" Yuang was silent and didn't speak. Li Wang spoke in a seemingly amiable manner. Xinyu didn't think that they came to find him for anything good, so he didn't want to waste time. "If you have something to say, just say it. Then this prince will get straight to the point." Li Wang narrowed his eyes and said slightly threateningly, "This prince already knows what happened before your Highness entered the palace. If your Highness doesn't want this matter to be known to everyone, it's best that you find a way to persuade His Majesty to agree to take a consort." "I was wondering what it was." "So it's this. Li Wang is really interesting. Why do you think I'll be threatened by you?" Xinyu raised his eyebrows. "If it's just for this matter, Li Wang shouldn't waste our time. Does your Highness think that His Majesty won't care about this matter?" Li Wang couldn't stand Xinyu's fearless appearance. His tone was vicious. "For the time being, we can say that it happened before you entered the palace, so His Majesty can't delve into it. What if this prince says that this prince also knows that after your Highness entered the palace, your Highness secretly left the palace to meet with an old lover?" Xinyu's expression became a little subtle. Li Wang thought that he had stepped on Xinyu's sore spot and the corners of his mouth rose. "This prince also doesn't want to publicize this scandal to everyone. As long as your Highness does as this prince says, this prince guarantees that no one else will mention this matter of your Highness meeting with someone else. Your Highness should think carefully before answering." "Think about what?" Shang Junlin's low voice came from the other side. "The person who met your Highness that day was Zhen." What, does Li Wang have an opinion about this? This official doesn't dare. The smile on Li Wang's face froze. Genius 1 second. Remember this website, www.biku50. CC Literature Mobile Version Reading Website, Biku50. CC.